Call the Select Board meeting for February 26, 2024 back to order. Earlier this evening, we met in executive session to consider some action on 62 Route 28 West Harwich. We've referred on to council to work with the interested party. And also, as required by open meeting law, you are hereby informed that the town will be video and audio taping as well as live broadcasting this public meeting. In addition, anyone in the audience who plans to video or audio tape this meeting must notify the chair prior to the start of the meeting. Hearing nobody, please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Is there anybody for public comments and announcements?
Good evening, Ashley Symington, Director of Youth and Family Services. I have the next parent workshop series, Parent Chat, is coming up next Tuesday, this time, March 5th. Grandparents having the tough conversations, so we'll be going over some tips and strategies for grandparents that are either raising their grandkids, which is who we're kind of gearing it towards, but also for just anyone looking for tips for how to connect with their grandkids that they've got in their lives.
That's great.
So, yeah.
And where will that be?
Oh, I'm sorry, yes. That's going to be over at the 204 from 6 to 7 p.m. upstairs in the library.
Great, thank you.
welcome.
Sounds
Thanks,
like a
Judy.
great program.
Thank you.
Anybody else for public comment and announcement?
Hello, Carolyn Carey, Community Center Director. I'll go quickly through them. I apologize, but they're coming up so fast. I have some of our March events over at the Community Center. The first one, simply stop in and guess how many jelly beans there are. It's on display already. The next is laser tag, which is on Saturday, March 2nd. And if you don't give me a good budget, I'll take that. You're laughing, some of you. International Women's Day is on March 8th. And what we do for that is we have thank you notes and flowers. You can write a person's name, a woman who has made an impact on you, plant it in our flower pot. We will send the thank you notes out for you. That's happening. Then we have a dog training talk on March 8th, 5:30 to 7:30. This is just for the people who own dogs. It is not to bring your animal to, so please, but it'll be a great talk. Then we have composting and living soil talk on March 14th from 5:30 to 7:30. March 15th, we have Minute to Win It, family game time. You're all welcome to come. That's from 6 to 8 p.m. Then we have photos with the bunny. So bring your cameras. We have a bunny who's just going to stop by and you can take all the photos. It's a very popular event. That happens on the 15th, 5:30 to 6:30. We're back to doing our DIY egg hunt because this year Easter is in the end of March and there's just no way to know what the weather will be. So we're going to do our DIY events. You can call and make a reservation to pick up an entire kit that you can take home and do. It has eggs and craft projects and toys and so much fun.
Nice.
Our next military lecture is on March 22nd at 5:30. The last one had 49 people. Isn't that great?
That's great.
Wonderful. Then we have a craft class with we will provide all of the supplies. You just show up. And then, of course, our free advertising event so that the community can know what else is happening. Not that we don't put on a lot here in the town, in our side, but there are a lot of businesses who do wonderful things for families around town, too. So
That's great.
there'll be a quiz later. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn. Anybody else for public comments and announcements? Joe?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening, everybody. As the board is aware, the wastewater superintendent, Dan Pelletier, and I working with representatives from GHD, have rescheduled the community forum. You may recall the day that it was scheduled for was the snowstorm. So we are rescheduling the community forum on Phase 3 wastewater construction to be held on Thursday, March 7th, 2024 at 7 p.m. This will be at the community center. We will be reminding folks of that new date change as we did the last time by notifying folks in the area and also putting information on the website. We will also be including a Microsoft Teams link for anyone that wants to remote in to participate. So again, that is Thursday, March 7th at 7 p.m. at the community center.
Great, thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
Anybody else for a public comment announcement? Hearing nobody, we will go on to our presentation, which is our discussion with the Massachusetts Municipal Association form of government representative, who is Charlie Costello. It's online, I believe. Oh, you're muted.
Good evening.
Yeah, good evening. Thank you for joining us this evening to go over government and charter-related issues that we reached out to your organization for, and I will let you take the lead.
Well, thank you, and good evening, everybody. I'm Charles Costello. I'm the former town manager in the town of Middleborough, and previous to that, I was the town administrator in the town of Hingham, where I live, now for 16 years. And I started my career in local government at the town, or actually the city known as the town of Watertown, as the assistant town manager there. And 27 years ago, the Mass Municipal Management Association began a form of government committee to help cities and towns looking at their forms of government, looking at their charters, and providing free technical assistance to them, which we've done consistently now throughout the Commonwealth, here on the eastern part of the state and Western Mass as well, and the Cape. And I think, probably the best way to approach this is to talk about your particular situation. I've read your charter. I think it's a good one. It has a lot of strong management aspects to it. It gives the town administrator, the keys that we think of when we go out and talk to cities and towns as being good practices, best practices, negotiating collective bargaining agreements, preparing executive budgets, controlling all or most of personnel decisions, and procurement, control of the procurement process. So you have all that already. And I think because you have a charter bylaw review committee, you've kept your language up to date, and you're continuing to do that, if I understand the current proposal before you correctly. And you're removing extraneous language that you don't need, and it looks like you're constantly updating your charter. So all those are good things. You have a rather involved capital outlay planning process, which is, very important. So, when I look at what we've done over the last 27 years in terms of advocating for more professional management, stronger professional management in communities, you've already done that in large part. You have relatively few elected officials other than the board of selectmen themselves, or the select board, I'm sorry, as you're now known as, and that's all good. The other thing that we've seen over the years is the decrease in elected, both staff elected positions and elected boards, and again, you've accomplished most of that. So I guess I'd like to know from you how best I could help you.
I think that one thing that would be helpful to this board is I shared with you the report that we had from our bylaw charter group, if you wouldn't mind going through those points to educate all of us on your thoughts and process, et cetera, related to those points.
Well, again, the current proposals, to you, we can start there. The idea of mailing warrants to everybody in town is a good one. We do that here in Hingham. I know other towns do that. Certainly it's an expense, but if you're trying to inform the public and encourage the public to come to town meeting, I think it's a good strategy. Under procedures, it looks like what they're suggesting is codifying a two-part town meeting approach, spring and fall, finance and zoning and bylaws and other things. I know lots of towns try and do that. A lot of towns have the intention of doing that. Some may even have it in their charters. I might be a little concerned about the flexibility that takes away if it's written, in such a way as to, take away the ability to do anything but finance in the spring and zoning and other matters in the fall. I think giving you the flexibility, not naming a day during the week you're going to have your meeting, but giving you the whole week to decide where that meeting is going to reside is not a bad one. There's some other housekeeping items here. In terms of signing warrants, that just seems like a minor change. Relating to the town administrator, that also seems like a minor change. Again, taking out language that doesn't need to be there is a good thing. Toward the end, I guess you had a particular interest here in knowing how everybody votes on all the warrant articles, which is a little unique. But if that's what the town meeting voted, then I guess that's something you need to do. Again, I think certainly the housekeeping items I think are necessary. And I guess I would just have you think about being too restrictive in language relating to your town meetings and what you could do at your town meetings.
Thank you.
Does that cover them? I think that covers the main issues that were in the current proposal.
Yeah, I think so, and I think what I'll do now is ask board members if they have specific questions that they would like to pose. So in doing so, Michael, do you have any questions for Mr. Costello?
I defer to Jeff.
Jeff, you have any questions?
So, thank you for being here. Yeah, I'm a freshman on this board here, so forgive me if my question is a freshman question, but how have you seen bylaw charter committees and select boards working hand in hand to create a more improved document? And how do you see us using somebody like yourself in the process? Because I won't speak for the rest of the board, I'll speak for myself. And I'll say that our bylaw charter review committee has done a lot of work, and they've been at it a long time, and this board is starting to entertain some of their articles. But I do want it to be a collaborative effort, and I do want it to be a Harwich effort, not an outside person coming in and telling us what our charter should look like, if that's clear. So how do you see yourself working with our committee and this select board effectively?
Absolutely. I mean, this is a local process, and it's entirely Harwich driven. And you should decide what works for you and, what, issues you may have with the charter, concerns you may have with the charter, things that have come up. The good thing about having a standing committee like yours is that it gives you the opportunity to address things in a fairly, timely way. Some charters are written so that there's, a 10-year review and there's no standing committee. So if something is going on locally that, isn't working, most towns don't go to the trouble of appointing a committee. They just wait, until the next committee comes up. So, I think you have a good structure. It's in your charter. I think it's a collaborative process between you appoint the committee reports back to you. It's a collaboration. It's both committees, both yourselves and your charter bylaw review committee should be in constant dialogue over their recommendations, and you may agree with them, and there may be some you don't agree with, but I think it's an iterative process that you have to work through. I can just give you a perspective based on reading a ton of charters over the years and having had experience talking to boards like yourselves and charter committees similar to yours, and giving some outside perspective. But that's basically all I can do for you.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Don, do you have any questions?
No, actually, I agree with what Jeff said. I mean, it's basically our charter. In full disclosure, I was on the charter review bylaw committee, and the ongoing process has been working. It's been changing stuff. To the extent that they would like to be able to get in touch with you, then I'm fine with that, but it really needs to be a Harwich document, and Jeff's right.
Thank you, Don. Michael?
You mentioned, and thank you for being here, you mentioned going down the lists of what Charter Bylaw Review gave you, or Julie gave you to review. And we got to signing warrant, and then right after the signing of the warrant, it was related to the town administrator. Can you expand on that? It was a pretty vague, you skipped over it, kind of.
Yeah, I wasn't referring to that. I was referring to 2.2.2, where in the underlined changes, they were recommending to you that the warrants shall be mailed to every household having at least one registered voter, and posted on the town's website instead of being published in the newspaper. And I suggested that was a good practice, and it's one that we use here in Hingham.
Yeah, and right after the signing of the warrant, you did mention town administrator and restriction, or at least that's what I wrote down. I guess let me change directions then. And as far as form of government goes, looking at our charter, obviously you've been involved in form of government. Right now we have a 5-member elected board, and what's been referred to me as a weak town administrator, and then there's the town manager form of government. And you mentioned our good practices on all of what our town administrator is allowed to do. But in our charter, it gives us the authority to give him the contracting, to give him the procurement. Do you think our form of government, given everything you work on, is an effective form of government?
Yeah, as I said earlier, I think you have a pretty strong charter from a town administrator's point of view. I wouldn't consider, I've read weak bylaws and I've read weak charters. This is not one of them.
Thank you.
So I think it's you have checks and balances in your charter. The town administrator has appointing authority over department head level people with your review and other people. So it's to me, whether it's a town administrator or town manager title doesn't matter so much as what's in the document itself. And there's some town manager charters that are weaker than what you have, frankly. So, to me, a town administrator and a board of selectmen working together it's a collaborative effort. There's shared responsibility in many places, and that's not a bad thing.
Thank you.
Thank you, Charlie. I just have a couple follow-up questions. Do you have any idea how many towns do still mail their warrant to to the citizens?
I don't. It's nothing I've ever looked at. I don't know anybody who has collected that data. However, there might be some information like that residing at the MMA. I think it's worth contacting Denise Baker, who's the staff person there, and she might know of something, but I've never seen that data.
Would she also have data on how many towns have a standing bylaw charter review, just out of curiosity?
I doubt it, but, no harm in asking.
Sure, okay, thank you.
But like I said, there is, I think more commonly, what you see are committees that are formed every 10 years, but they're not standing committees. Or every so many years to review a charter, but they're not standing.
Okay,
I think that's more common.
right. And to your point about the question on town manager versus town administrator, you're saying that the language in the current charter is strong enough that you've seen other towns with less charter, even though they have less of a strong charter, even though they have a town manager. Is that what I understood you to say?
Absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely. The title, when you go through a charter process sometimes and you're trying to make change, words matter. And in some places, having a town manager connotes giving way too much authority to that person. So towns will write a fairly good charter, a fairly strong charter from a management point of view, but elect to call the position town administrator so as not to overly concern the public. We had a charter process here in Hingham in the 70s. It was for a town manager, and it just scared the daylights out of people. At that time, there was no professional management at all. I was the first professional here in Hingham 32 years ago, and I was called an executive secretary at the time. That was probably the weakest form they could choose, and they did that deliberately so as not to, create opposition. So you really can't go by the title. There's a large variation, and it's really what's in the document itself that matters.
Okay, thank you. Joe, I don't know that you have any follow-up for Charles, do you?
Well, no, as a member of the form of government
Right.
committee, we recommend that local administrators not participate.
Right,
And I respect that and agree with that.
so I didn't want to leave you out, but
Thank you.
that's.
And I also
what
want to
thought.
thank Charlie, my fellow committee member, so.
Yeah, and Charlie, it's nice to hear you're a former Watertown person. I'm from Watertown as well, so nice to,
Are you really?
yeah, so born and bred, yep. So good to
Oh,
meet you.
interesting. I was there for 4 years, from 1988 to 1992.
Okay, yeah, nice. Well, thank you
Nice
for
community.
this information, and I'm sure, next steps as we move forward in our process, we'll be back in touch.
Very
Anything
good.
else?
Nice meeting you all.
Thank you, thanks, take care. Okay, Jeff?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move to vote the Assistant Town Administrator's recommendation to grant permission by Verizon New England Incorporated and NSTAR Electric, DBA Eversource Energy, to place a new jointly owned pole, 42/30.5, at the northeasterly side of Main Street Extension, Harwich, Mass. I'm going to split this again.
Oh, you are? Okay,
Just,
second.
yeah.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I move that we accept the resignation of Donna Richardson, Harwich Accessibility Rights Committee, effective immediately, February 27th, 2024. And also accept the resignation of Charlene Pylon, Bikeways Committee, effective immediately.
Second.
Moved and seconded.
Yeah, I'd like to, once again, unfortunately, we're here yet another week, discussing another resignation, and last week I had some words to say about the resignation that was put in front of us last week. But it also is another opportunity for me to let the volunteers in the committees and the people who serve our town understand that they are valued and they are important. And if there's a point in time where any of our committee members or volunteers feel that they're unsupported, unheard, or undervalued, I would hope that they would go to their chair of their committee, that respective committee, and then reach out to the select board liaison so that at least we can have a conversation for, if nothing more, an education for the select board to understand where potentially we're not doing right by our committee members. Because for me, it's unacceptable to read in a packet that another committee member feels undervalued and unsupported. And all I ask is for an opportunity to sit down and have a conversation, and maybe we can clear things up. So that's what I have to say
So
about that.
just, I would also follow up, I did commit to this board that I would follow up on Charlene's resignation, and I did speak with Fran, who is the chair, and I think some of the frustration there is from when they had asked us to put in the vulnerability flyer, and we did work on that. Unfortunately, we could not put that in an excise tax, and we could not put it in the real estate tax, so it's going in the real estate tax that will go out in July. So I think there was some frustration there, but unfortunately, we're limited, and I did explain that to Fran, just to share that information. So that's where he felt it stemmed from. Don?
Thank you, Madam Chair. In the case of the Accessibility Rights Committee, though, we're actually going back to the point where they can't meet. And the bigger question really is, we've never tackled, is are we going to continue with the committee and populate it? And in what way is it going to proceed forward, or are we not? Because in accepting this, we're back into limbo again.
Michael?
I'd just piggyback off of Don and reiterate that the board took up at the beginning of this year, redoing the charters for a lot of committees. And the more we look
Charges.
into charges, the more we look into committees, the more I'm seeing at least, that some of these were written 15 to 20 years ago. And there's nothing for these committees to do. And specific to the Disability Rights Committee, 3 members resigned simply because there was nothing left to do. They were given a charge, they did their work, and anytime that it's recommended to disband a committee, it's like we're kicking somebody's puppy, and that is not the goal here. It is to try and limit the committees that don't have anything to do to alleviate this frustration. So on the disability rights, whomever is the liaison on that committee, it is their task to look to redoing the charge. And Don, I know you and I held off on appointments on this committee at the last round until a new charge gets written, because there's no sense in appointing new people for an old charge that we're losing people already for. So, and I know that this committee in particular has been supported, as has Bikeways.
So Don's the liaison.
Yeah, and Michael's right, and the problem is that in order for us to get from there to here, we have to actually look critically at it. The original committee was set up for physical impediments, like where are the town buildings that prohibit you access properly? That's largely been accomplished. So unless, I think Jeff, you interviewed that one with me, unless we get into other things like low vision and blindness or audio problems, and get into a whole different field, what they had been doing is done. So it's a question of what does the board want to do? It's not just me reviewing the charge. It's like, what does it want? What do we want it to be?
Well, I think we would look to you as the liaison to come back with that feedback, to say what
This
you...
is the feedback. It is a whole new territory that is exclusive of what they had been doing.
Well, I mean, put that discussion on an agenda, so
Okay.
that we say, let's talk about it.
Okay.
Right, so,
And I just don't want the message to get lost. If you're on a committee and you're unhappy, make a phone call to your chair. The chair will reach out to the liaison, we can have a conversation. Because whether it be my private business or what I'm doing right here for the public, it really bothers me when people who are giving their time don't feel appreciated, and that is not the case, at least from this board member, and I think I speak for the rest. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. And so.
So we have a motion and a second.
Right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. 4-0, Joe.
I move that we approve the Select Board meeting minutes for February 20, 2024.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. 4-0.
Thank you, Madam.
Thank you. New business, updates on special town election and discussion on polling hours. Good evening, Emily.
Good evening, Emily Mitchell, Town Clerk. So I did want to come before you this evening to give you some updates on the special town election. As you know, it is scheduled for April 9th of 2024. It has the sole office of the Select Board vacancy. The seat will expire on May 21st at the annual town election. Last week was the deadline for any interested candidates to file completed nomination papers. We did have one candidate return papers, so we now know at this point we'll have one candidate for the one open seat. So now that we're kind of aware of what the ballot will look like and what the candidate field will look like, it felt like an appropriate time to come back to you to discuss election day polling hours. So for local elections, the Select Board does have the authority, more authority than with a state or federal election, to set or restrict hours. I did provide a memo that's in your packet that outlines the parameters that you do have to set or restrict hours. So just briefly to go over them, for a local election, polls can open as early as 5:45 a.m. They must open no later than 12 p.m. They do have to be open for at least 4 hours, and then they do have to close by 8 p.m. The town has reduced hours in the past. When I was reviewing prior election results, it looks like the last time we did that was our annual election in 2020. I know that was partially a COVID-related matter, but it was another situation where all of the races were uncontested. The last non-COVID election I was able to locate where hours were restricted was another special election back in 2017. The hours at that point were set 12 to 8. So you have, a lot of latitude within those parameters. So I wanted to come before you as we set the warrant, which I'll present to you in one of your future meetings.
Thank you, Emily.
Sure.
Any discussion by board members on any feedback? Michael?
I'd move that we approve polling hours from noon to 6.
Second.
Seconded. Any other discussion? Don?
I was just going to say, and Michael did that, it's really important in a community that's got a mixture of retirees and people who actually work and come back, that they have the opportunity at the end of the day to be able to vote. So anything that was like 12 to 4 was a non-starter.
That makes sense to me. I would have recommended the same.
Yeah. Jeff, do you have any comments?
Thank you, Emily.
Sure.
I have no comment.
So I'll go with noon to 6. I was even thinking, noon to 7, and I think, I just, people getting out of work at 5, I just get concerned. I don't want anyone to feel like they don't have the ability to vote. So, but if the majority feel that noon to 6 is the best timing, I would go along with that. So we've got a motion and a second, so, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. 4-0. Thank you, Emily.
Thank you.
And now we have Monomoy Regional School District to present their fiscal year 2025 budget. And we have Scott Carpenter, Michael McMillan, and looks like Terry and Joy. All right, you're gonna let, yeah.
Scott needs a wide berth there.
Do you want to move that?
Want to move that chair? Yeah.
Come on, Scott, hurry up.
Jeff knows no mercy. And thanks for coming this evening. I thought you were going to dial it in, Scott.
Hey, never. Hey, this, when you get hurt, for me, having this week and this meeting on my calendar as a goal, it's like So this is the first time that I've had a tie on in a long time. And for me, it was really important that I'm here in person. I know this is a budget that the school district has put a lot of time and effort in. Michael, our business manager, Robin Millen, our director of curriculum, instruction and assessment, who's here, and the school committee. I think it's a budget that we can be proud of. It's a budget that loops back to conversations we had a year ago when we were here in terms of just when Michael and I were forecasting what to expect. We know this is a year that ESSER funds that towns and school districts were relying on have evaporated. That came with COVID. There was some staffing that we added during that time that was important staffing, and we've had to make decisions in terms of, okay, how do we contract but make sure that we're still having very reasonable class sizes for our students and lots of supports for our students, but we're also in the midst of contract negotiations. And one of the things that we all know is that it's more challenging to live here on the Cape. Housing's a challenge, and we've got to make sure that our teachers, as well as our families, can afford to go and live here and be here. So, there's a whole lot of stuff that's behind the numbers that Michael will present tonight, but I think this is a budget that we can be proud of, that'll still have us be a strong, competitive school district.
Thank you, Scott.
All right, thank you very much. So Scott's kind of covered this first slide, which is our 30,000 feet view. That's about us, we're meeting student needs while dealing with the number of financial challenges that we're facing. The budget that we're requesting is $46.5 million. It's a 4.8% increase from last year, just over $2 million. And the assessments themselves are actually slightly more than 4.8% because our other offsetting revenue is not as much as 4.8%. So Harwich's increase under this budget would be 4.9%, and Chatham's would be 6.2%. So that's it. So I'm now on 22 pages where I'm just going to say all that all over again in a lot more detail. So I'll go quickly. There is a lot of information here, but I know you don't want to necessarily go into all that detail. So I'll go quickly, but if anybody has any questions at any point, or if you want me to get into more information,
Thank you.
please let me know. So that's just the same information again. So just put it in a little bit of context. That's all the increases in the budget. This slide shows the budget since the district was formed back in 2013. This is slightly higher than the average in light of the challenges facing the district, including we've got ongoing salary negotiations that we're in right now, the inflation which the district along with everybody else has been facing amongst with other issues. I also think way back in 20 and 21 we had particularly 21 we had a relatively small increase when inflation was 4.7%, and I think that's had a knock-on effect to put pressure on the budget now. So I'm going to go and start going into a little more detail on what's driving some of these increases. This slide shows the budget broken down by major account. That's a category that the state provides and is a way of categorizing all our expenditure. The first, so the first column gives you the name of the major account, then it's the budget as it was for this year and the proposed budget for 2025, and then the final column shows the increase, and it goes sort of green is where it's a reduction or a small increase, through to red where it's a bigger increase. The most significant increase is health insurance, which I'm sure you're dealing with as well. We're seeing an 8% increase in most of our health insurance plans, and that's driving a big increase in our budget. Also, then the other three, sort of the reddest there, are in teachers and guidance counselling and in other teaching services, which includes instructional assistants. So that's all driven by salary negotiations and the positions which were funded by federal grants for COVID. Those positions now being coming into the district general fund. And we have saved, so we do have, and I will come on to this again, there's a couple that are actually going down. We have some savings in instructional materials.
Can I stop it?
Yeah, sure.
Sorry, thank you both for being here. Just for clarification, the other teaching services are positions that were funded.
That's, yeah, it's,
but now we're not. And is that 100% of that 340,599?
no, that's, so actually, the other teaching service is mostly instructional assistance, and that's mostly driven by contract negotiation increases that we're expecting to see next
Understood.
year. The one where I was highlighting for those positions that are no longer funded, that's that guidance, counselling and testing positions. And that is a combination
I
of
see.
those, some positions that were funded, are no longer funded, and salary increases. There are other ESSER positions as well under teachers, so it's not purely that, but that's part of it.
Don?
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's going to seem odd coming from me, but can you kind of explain the programs with other school districts
Yes.
that are being eliminated? I'm
Yes.
just kind of concerned about that.
So that includes, and really the big ticket item in there is that includes school choice. So that is where people choose to leave, people are born in or live in Chatham and Harwich, but choose to go to another public school, and we have to pay for some of that. So good news story that we have is that the number of students doing that has gone down significantly in the last few years, and so that's reducing our costs, and that's what's driving that figure. We also have, we do also have students who we are not able to serve their special education needs within the district, and we pay for tuition in other districts, other schools, really like private schools or collaboratives, where they receive special education services that we can't provide, and just that's a relatively small number. It fluctuates, and our budget right now is down slightly. So we're not cancelling programs, we're keeping students in the district, and so that's reducing the cost there.
Thanks.
Thank you.
So yeah, so this is, I'm kind of reiterating some of the things I've already highlighted. Employee insurance, we do have some budget requests, which I'll talk about in more detail. And also, as we'll talk in more detail about our capital and debt, we want to continue investing in our buildings to help reduce future costs. And then maintenance costs, we've just seen a big increase in the cost of maintaining our buildings as they get older, and as the cost, just like in your own home, the cost of getting somebody in to do work is very expensive. And we experience those cost increases as well.
May I,
Yeah, go ahead.
on that note, thank you, and please
Yeah.
bear with me.
Yeah,
but
no, please. Some
I'm
more
catching up to
questions.
speed here.
Yeah.
When you say maintenance on the buildings,
Yep,
the way I think about it at this point is Harwich's elementary school
Yep.
is 100%, the maintenance
Yes.
is funded by our town.
yep.
What does the Monomoy School maintenance look like in terms of, is there a split?
Yeah, so the split is done, so it's basically done on enrollment.
So it's the
roughly.
same as, okay,
So Chatham's paying for all the maintenance and all the costs related to their elementary school, Harwich is paying for it for their elementary school, and everything else is split in a number of different ways, but basically it's all done on enrollment, so foundation enrollment, is splitting those costs.
And we also have to keep in mind that, 10, 11 years ago, we had a brand-new high school that you didn't
Yeah.
need to have a lot of maintenance, and now we're, 11 years into this, and you're starting to see, motors and HVAC systems that are needing to get replaced. So you're seeing maintenance costs that weren't there because it was brand new. You've now got a seasons building that has, each year, a little bit more maintenance costs and a little bit more maintenance costs.
And it's the most complicated building by far.
Sure.
Do you know what I mean? The old elementary schools, hardly anything on the roof. These things, there's,
Yeah.
well, thank you for that, and I would assume you have a projected maintenance cost for fiscal year '25 for,
yep.
it's in here.
So that's that increase.
That's
So,
That's
so-
the total of what
Well,
you
it's not the
project.
total, that's just so actually, if I go back here, so one of these, so operations and maintenance is 4.2 million.
Yep.
You see it's down there, like halfway down, there's
Yep.
their operations and maintenance.
So actually, while we're on that, do you
No,
have a
no,
follow-
go ahead, please.
So while we're on that, I know the middle school roof, which I feel like
Yep.
we've been talking about for years. Is that currently in the capital?
It's in capital,
So-
yep. Not the whole just the first part of the project. So we have applied to the MSBA for a grant to help cost that. And if we were successful in that grant, then the first part would be next year. And really that's just doing like the analysis of the roof, getting the architecture drawings done, and getting the work bid out. And in the following year, we'd have to start, we'd have to issue debt in order to pay for the roof to be done. But that would come before you, well, actually it would come before you in a number of ways, because we would need town meeting approval. but we'd also need, it would also come as part of next FY26 budget. But we have a ways to go before we get there, because we've got to get into the state grant program first. We had a new survey of the roof done recently, and they identified a chunk of it which was actually older than we thought it was. So that will go into the application, which increases the chances that we'll get into the grant program. So, but it's just, it really depends how many schools apply, how much money there is, and they just basically order all the schools by age and cut off the ones below the amount they can afford.
And just to be clear, that grant would be just to be able to have some money towards the analysis that has to be
actually,
done.
so the way it would actually do both, they kind of give it to you in chunks, so you get approval for the first bit for the analysis and the estimate of the costs, and then we would then go, but so when you, and you know, the MSBA bring you on for the full cost of the project at the percentage they're going to reimburse. But then there's 2 phases to the approval by the towns, which is the first is just the analysis to get the cost, and the second part is to do the full project.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
So the MSBA would fund.
Cover the-
Sorry, MSBA is Massachusetts School Building Authority. They would reimburse a percentage of both analysis and the construction.
And what's the timeline on them telling you whether or not?
They should tell us in, I think it's like the fall. I think it takes a long time. So
Okay.
like summer into fall, we would know. So that's why it's in the budget, and then you hope that you get in.
Okay. Don?
Yeah, actually, thank you, Madam Chair. Following up on what you were saying, you've got something out going on now that talks about parts of the middle school.
Yeah.
I'm presuming that at some point in time, you're going to at least explore feasibility study of the whole building. And if that happens, who is it driven by? Is it driven by us, the state, and
To do what? To
possibly replace the building if it becomes that? And do we do that
So-
review, or does the state do that?
so that if so, say we decided, you know, we being all of us decided that the best way forward was just to replace the middle school, then that would be driven by us. So we would. There is another program, the same organization that provides the funding for the roofs also has another program, their core program for building new schools, and it was a needs based. So they would look at you know, similarly with the roof, they would look at how old the existing building is, how fit for purpose or not the existing building is, and on the basis of that, they would decide whether they would be accepted into the program.
So at this point in time, we're not actually talking about that, we're talking about picking off
Right, right.
major problems.
Yes,
Just
exactly.
to be clear, that hasn't been part of any conversation.
That's what I was following
The
up.
middle
I mean,
school, yeah, the middle school as a building is a great building. Like many structures here on Cape Cod, it's got, cedar clapboard siding that, with old wooden trim that is getting desperately in need of some re-siding all around to protect the envelope of the building. But I think if we were to re-side that building and get a new roof on that building, it's going to serve both towns for years to come
Yeah.
quite well.
So the headline for folks out there listening to this is we're not looking at replacing a building, we're
Absolutely.
picking off major problems that we want to head off even bigger problems.
Yes, absolutely. Keep that building going, so we're investing in that building as is.
Thank you. So
All right, good.
nobody, oh, sorry, Michael.
On the operation and maintenance, what
Yeah.
percentage, and I know it's the whole budget, what is Harwich paying and what is Chatham paying?
So on operations, and so let's see.
Based on enrollment, so it's the same number as the
Ah.
normal assessment, correct?
So let me think. I would need to, because I would need to break down the operation and maintenance for Harwich Elementary School, and then the operations and maintenance for Chatham.
Those are
Elementary
included
School,
in
'cause
that
those are
number?
separated out. Yeah,
Be a
and then
great follow-up question, you don't need answers.
yeah,
I'd
yeah.
love to know.
So it's roughly about, Harwich pays roughly 3/4, but that's really rough. But I would need to get.
And and I know it's only initial conversation, Joe, you and I discussed it, the grounds.
Yep.
Is that figured into this with
Yes.
the idea of subcontracting the
Yes.
grounds?
Yep. So I've about built in an increase based on some initial market research we've done.
I'd love to see that initial
Oh,
market
yeah.
research.
Oh, I mean, it's like
And-
in there. So our plan is to go out to bid in that before, over the next month or so that we have firm cost before we get into next year's budget.
So that change will put
Right.
Harwich paying roughly 2/3 of their maintenance in that building as well.
So it will not, so that will not change the proportion that Harwich pays. So right now Harwich pays for all of the fields and grounds work at Harwich Elementary School and for, say, 3/4 of it at the middle and high school. And that includes, that includes paying that includes paying 3/4 of the bill from the town of Chatham to do the work at middle school. Includes 0% of the work that the Chatham does right now at the elementary school. And likewise, Chatham is paying for 1/4 of the work that we pay for that gets done for the fields and grounds at the middle school and the high school. If that makes sense.
Wow.
So, what happens is, both towns get paid for the work they do in the fields and grounds in our schools, and instead of paying the towns, we would be paying a contractor. That's the proposal. So what might happen in both cases is the cost will go up, because instead of using the towns, we have to pay a contractor, but the share of the costs is not changed.
We pay the bulk of it.
But you pay you pay the 3/4 because you have bulk of the students, but you pay the bulk of the cost right now.
Yeah, of more.
And that's not gonna change yet.
And that's being initiated by Chatham, not the school district.
So, I mean, it was a discussion we've had with Town of Chatham because they're struggling, I think everybody is struggling to get enough people to do the work. And it's one option that we're exploring.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Michael.
All right. This is a slide kind of to the earlier point about those ESSER positions. So we have approximately $575,000 worth of positions that were funded by this federal COVID relief funds, that's ESSER, which are no longer funded after this year. And alongside that, we have our salary, we have, regular salary increases as people move through their salary grids. And we are in the middle of contract negotiations, and I'm going to come on and talk about that a little bit more in a moment. And both of those things are driving an increase in cost. In addition, we are looking to reduce a number of positions in order to offset those costs. So that $630,000 up there is a net cost of increases in salary and reductions in the number of positions as we look to, essentially we're seeing enrollment go down. And so as a result, we have targets around class sizes to maintain a certain class size. And at the moment, in the past, that size has been to make sure we have enough teachers. But at this point, because the numbers have gone down, we can sort of re-norm the number of staff to get in line with that target for class sizes, and that will reduce the number of staff.
So can I just stop you there to ask a question on class? So class sizes makes me go to the, pupil population in terms of where you were at. I think last year, I think you had a waiting list to get into.
School choice.
Yeah, school choice.
Yeah, what we anticipate, we'll actually be having this conversation at this week's school committee meeting, but the high school is a building that was built for 700. And because of some of the good news that Michael brought up, there are so many people from Chatham and Harwich who have chose to stay. So we've actually seen the number go over 700. So we've had the high school closed to school choice for the last couple of years and anticipate that it will be closed. So we won't be bringing in any more high school students because the building's already full.
Right.
Middle school's going to be, again, pretty tight, particularly after we do some renorming of class sizes. And it's not, means that we're going to have class sizes go through the roof. Oftentimes my budget presentations, begin talking about that at the elementary level, we try to staff our buildings so that we have 18 plus or minus 1 students in a classroom, 19 plus or minus 2 at the middle school and high school. Will be well within those class size guidelines at all the different levels. But again, it's just looking at what the actual number of students that are in the building. And it gets back to the question that Mary Anderson would ask us for the last couple of years and just say, hey, Scott, your enrollment's starting to go down. What about your staffing? So this is looking at that staffing and saying, okay, the enrollment's going down. Let's make sure that we're staffing within the class size guidelines that we've been building budgets around ever since I've been here, and look at some of those, the savings of, in terms of positions, to say, okay, what were really important positions that we added during ESSER that provided additional social emotional supports for kids, and let's make sure that we can hold on to those and provide that same high quality service that came in with that, with ESSER, while maintaining, quality class sizes across the schools.
Well, so last year, if I remember correctly, though, the other two positions that were I'm blanking on the actual name of the two positions for curriculum, the curriculum directors, those weren't funded with ESSER, right?
Correct.
So they were in the budget, but the other, because I know that was my argument last year, was these other positions that are needed
Yep.
shouldn't be funded with ESSER. So now we're looking at those positions and seeing how we fund those,
Yeah,
right?
yep.
And when are we going to get data on those curriculum director positions? I know that they just came in last year, and we talked about they would need some time, but when are we going to see that data?
So there'll be presentations. I know there was a presentation about a month ago that they gave to the school committee, and they'll continue providing presentations as the year goes on, and for future years as well.
Okay. Michael?
Well, just to follow up on that, when will this board get either a presentation? And that was discussed last year, fairly high level. And we were gonna see something this year. I do recognize it's a fairly new position, but there's gotta be something.
Yeah.
When can we expect to hear that something?
I think when we report out, and I'd be happy to, when we report out at the end of the year to the school committee, to come back, and I'd be happy to come with Dr. Millen and do a presentation before this board and also before Chenham.
Hopefully you'll be walking by then.
Oh, I hope I'm walking much
Way
sooner
before
than.
Thank you, Dr. Carr.
And then, so the green circles, because it's good news. So I do have some areas where costs have gone down. I've already mentioned school choice. So school choice at its most recent peak in FY18, we had 223 students who lived in Harwich and Chatham and were choosing school districts, not Monomoy. This year it's estimated to be down to 77. So that's a huge improvement, and that's helped over a number of years, helped to reduce our costs. And then also, like as I mentioned, out of district tuition, that's for special education students, and that just tends to ebb and flow. We have the way the debt payments in the high school are structured, it goes down slightly every year, so that we have this down. And also we were able to buy, with funds from a number of different places, able to buy IT equipment during COVID and from the state funds, and so we have a year we don't need to renew a lease, and so we're saving some money there too. So just over the next couple of slides, I just wanted to highlight a couple of proactive things we're doing to help to improve services for our students. Last year we developed the portrait of the graduate, identifies all the attributes that we hope to give students as they graduate from Monomoy: independent and confident learners, critical thinkers, communicators and leaders, and engaged citizens. So this is what you get for your money. So we're developing students who will be able to contribute to your communities and beyond. We're also in the process of developing the strategic plan, really partly how we deliver that and how we make it happen, and how we prioritize and focus our work over the next few years. And part of that is delivering, and that is reflected in the budget. So these are some items that we hope will help to deliver. Some of these are around delivering on those priorities, and also meeting specific student needs and requirements that are required in order to meet student needs.
Can I just stop you there
Yeah.
for 1 second? What does it mean when it's differentiation professional development? Because I know that there are other budget items that are for development.
Yeah, so when you talk about differentiation, it's you have a range of learners in a classroom, and it's supporting teachers to be able to work with that breadth of learners is what
Okay,
it's
yeah.
edu-speak differentiation is what
Okay.
it means there.
Thank you.
So yeah, so the items that are in that are not shaded are the ones that are currently included in the budget, and the shaded ones have not been included in the budget, where we're seeking things like grants or other funding sources to pay for them, although we'll just have to wait. Then I mentioned already, I won't go through all this, but we do have some capital investment, which we are undertaking. And, you know, Scott mentioned earlier, we are hoping to start a project to look at re-siding the middle school, replacing the siding and trim. And that's where the debt project's down there. And there's two, it just lists 2 payments on debt at the high school just because you pay twice during the year. We pay at the beginning of the year and the middle of the year. It's kind of a non sequitur, but I just wanted to highlight inflation because that has impacted our costs. And that impacts us directly because things we're buying are more costly, but also impacts our staff because when they're out there trying to buy their groceries, they now cost more money, and they look to us and put pressure on us to increase their salaries. Which brings me on to our staffing levels. This is just a moment in time, so we report to the state once a year on our staffing levels, and this is October 1st. Number. It's not an exact number of all the positions because there might be vacancies and so on at any one point, but it does give you a sense of the kind of overall picture. And our we were coming down to 2022 and it increased slightly. In part, that's been funded by ESSER, and we expect these numbers as we go into FY25. This number will go down slightly as we reduce the number of positions in order to pay for everything. This is funded from all sources. It's interesting if you get into some of the detail on this, you can see our instructional staff, so that's classroom teachers, is down slightly. And whereas support staff, that's guidance and librarians, has increased, as has special education related staff, which includes like occupational therapy and physical therapy and speech and language support. So you can see, that's kind of an indicator of we have fewer students, so we need slightly fewer classroom teachers, but the needs of those students has increased as we're seeing across the state and across the country, and that's driving up other areas of the budget. So, as we've mentioned a number of times, we're in the middle of contract negotiations with 3 of our unions, but the biggest one being the teacher union. And so we wanted to kind of demonstrate to you what the challenge we're facing is. So this chart, affectionately known as the Christmas tree, compares our salaries, our teacher salaries, with those of districts around, the Cape. And basically it shows the difference between Monomoy's rate for any one particular step and lane, and how that compares to the same step and lane in the district listed at the top of each column. So, the teachers have a grid. They have steps, and you progress up the steps each year if you're in the district, right up to step 16. And you can also, depending on your qualifications, you can be from a bachelor's right through to a doctorate. So that's the grid. And we chose ones to imagine kind of a fictional member of staff as they progress from the lowest paid point all the way up to the highest paid, and how we compare for each of those points with another district. So if it's green, that means we pay more than the other district does. If it's red, that means they pay more than we do. And the difference is included in those fields. So we did make some assumptions. So this chart does actually include some assumptions around health insurance reimbursement, because we have the same, we have a 70-30 split. Not all districts do. Some districts pay more, some districts pay less. And so we reflected an assumption, an estimate of the impact on that. But the big takeaway for us when we did this analysis is that we pay a lot less than the districts around us. And we feel that in our recruitment. So we are interviewing teachers, we're struggling to get people, and we're struggling to get them to stay, because in some cases they can go down the road and receive, $10,000 more. Sometimes they have to travel 20 minutes, half an hour to get there, but they're willing to do that for an extra $10,000. And that's what our teachers are telling us. And so that's the challenge. And this is FY24 comparisons. And we know other districts have got, generous increases for FY25. Not everybody, but the ones we've seen settled, they're seeing increases, and we have a number of people in negotiations right now. So we are trying to at least catch up and keep the pace with some of these districts. So that's reflected in this budget proposal.
Is there any difference in the number of days in terms of the pay?
Yes. Yeah, so it's kind of, there are some So we have 185, oh, jeez.
So there's 180
Three.
student, facing days, days of school for students. And then you typically have a number of professional development days. So we have 183 days, so there's 3 professional development days, including, some days at the beginning of the school year. Other districts may have 184, 185, so again, they're all in that same general neighborhood. I think if I was to go and just say, paint a picture 10 years ago, if we looked at the Christmas tree and we developed something like this every time we do negotiations, but it looked far more green than it does now. And, and you see that some districts, like Mashpee, have, sort of radically increased that pay for the first year, second year teachers to attract, sort of that lower paying, but get that prime, get the first round draft pick, so to speak.
Right.
And I think that's one of the things that, that we've been discussing and know that we need to kind of respond and at least position ourselves to be, at least see far more green than what we're seeing currently on this.
Thank you.
And then, so just a little bit more context. So this chart just shows the enrollment by town and by grade. This is actually October 1st, 2023. This is last year's data, but this year's is very similar. And this just shows, this shows 2 things really. One is how the split between Chatham and Harwich kind of fluctuates significantly year to year, and so that will impact the assessments year to year. And also, the bottom half of the chart is the lower grades, and you can see the average is much smaller for those grades than in the upper grades. So for example, grades K through 5, the average is around 108, whereas for 6 through 12 it's 119. So that's going to, over the next few years, we're going to see that impact our overall enrollment, and that will impact our costs. Now, unless of course we see large numbers of students come in at kindergarten and first grade, but that's not been our experience so far. And then this, so as I said, this is last year's data. This similar trend for this year. K through 5 is 99 average, 99 students, whereas 6 through 12 is an average of 122. So the gap's even bigger. That's partly because that grade 5 you see there and moved up, and that was a big jump there. All right, I'm kind of jumping all over the place, so if anybody has any questions.
Yeah, just one on the
Yeah.
enrollment and the decreases.
Yeah.
Has the school done any strategic planning considering some of the larger scale housing units that talking about building in Harwich and talking about building in Chatham? What if we get an influx one year, 50 and 50 in both
Yeah.
schools, which is realistic based on what each town is, I don't even want to call them proposals yet,
Yeah.
because they're not before us, so it's hard to plan, but one
Yeah.
of them is 288 units.
Yeah.
It's a lot of kids.
So the developer has reached out to me several times, and I share the enrollment numbers, and I think there's and they're sharing back to me what they project, like how many students would be at an elementary grade level. There is the capacity within our school buildings, our elementary schools and definitely our middle school, to go absorb. And the reality is it's not going to come online tomorrow, but but if it were to come online tomorrow, there's the capacity at the elementary and middle school. High school's tight right now, but the same sort of decrease that we're seeing in the middle school and elementary school is going to start at the high school in just a couple of years. So I think by the time one of these projects starts, if they were to come to fruition, we'd be seeing some wiggle room at the high school. So I think the capacity's there. One of the things that we have also been doing is at Harwich Elementary, we have a community partner that we've been working with the YMCA to provide preschool, infant, toddler care in available classroom space at Harwich Elementary School, and have an understanding with them, if we need the classrooms back, we're going to have to take the classrooms back. But again, so we've been thinking about it, and we're just waiting to see, are these projects actually going to move forward or not?
I appreciate you don't have a crystal ball, but I hope their projections are better than their traffic study projections. And it is interesting to me that they're approaching the school,
Yeah.
but the town's not involved in any way, shape, or form for future planning based on some of these proposals, and that's one proposal.
Yeah.
We're working on our own proposal, Chatham's working on several proposals. Any thought, or has any other district reached out to you regarding the migrant crisis and migrants being put into schools? And if so, how are you planning on dealing with some of what DY is dealing with now?
Right, so, so there are conversations that are happening statewide, because it's not just, it didn't just happen on the Cape or at DY. We haven't experienced that impact yet, but again, we're one school district away from where the impact has been felt.
Yeah.
So you just nothing yet from the state, so nothing really to plan for.
Right.
Thank you.
Well, and just to clarify, I think, same as you're saying, you're going to see decreases at the high school level as those lower grades come up that aren't as large. You also don't know for sure in terms of school choice, right? And then you also don't know the 288 units, I think that's over a course of 10 years. So
Yeah.
that would fluctuate as well. So I guess the question is, how can you best plan for that? I'm not sure you have an answer.
So,
Well, I think a way to plan for flexibility, and again, there's different school districts have approached school choice very differently in terms of incoming school choice. So I have always tried to work with the school committee and the business manager to manage school choice based on how many seats are available in the classrooms that we're running, so that we're not opening additional classrooms with school choice students, so that we can have the flexibility to bring the YMCA in as a community partner. But we've got plenty of applications from families from Dennis, Yarmouth, and Brewster that could fill classrooms, but at $5,000 a pop, it wouldn't pay for
Right.
the staffing. Again, just trying to make sure that we're managing school choice in a fiscally, wise manner. And that, I think, gives us the flexibility and elbow room if we do get a project or a housing,
Development,
that opens, development that opens up, or if, suddenly we find migrants are sent to, to some closed hotel.
Okay. Thank you.
So this next slide, again, this is just providing more context and detail. This is our total expenditure for all funds, again, by that major account category for the last 5 years. And this is not just the general funds, this is including grants, and underlines a couple of trends we've already talked about. So just so you know, the way this chart works again, so in each column, so for each year, the amounts are shaded just to give you a sense of which is the highest from red down to the lowest in green, and that's just for each year. So I mean, you can see the numbers don't really, the proportions don't really change all that much from year to year. Teachers are always, the teacher salaries is always the biggest category. However, just in terms of fluctuations within those years, over the last 5 years, we've seen that debt, as we've paid off the high school, has gone down, as has teacher salaries. We've talked about that sort of slight shift from classrooms to other support staff and teachers, and programs with other districts, as we've seen school choice. So those three numbers have come down. We have seen operations and maintenance has gone up, and pupil services, so transportation. So as we've faced rising costs for transportation, that has impacted the budget and their share of costs.
And can I just ask you one
Yeah.
thing on the instructional materials and equipment? And this is, I'm just looking, and it caught my eye, 2019, and then up to 2023. When you do, you know, the percentages, it's a 65% increase, but I imagine that there must have been some type of larger equipment purchased, or maybe it was the COVID
Yeah.
IT stuff?
So, yes, so a bunch of stuff. So we have invested in a lot of IT. Then we also invested in new ELA curriculum in the kindergarten, in the elementary grades. And so that was a cost for
Okay.
1 year. And there was also some costs which had been previously paid through for capital, like we would buy a bunch of computers, instead we're leasing those, and so moved where
Okay.
it's been paid from a little. So it's kind of, we have spent more money, particularly around curriculum materials, some more money around technology. And like as you mentioned, this is all funds, so some of these are grant funded, not from the general fund.
Okay.
And some sort of categorization of costs.
And because of those purchases, that's why your IT is
Yeah,
down?
yes, we
this
purchased
year.
some during the COVID.
Okay. Jeff?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. In pupil services,
Yep.
is that transportation only, or are there other?
No, it's transportation, also includes like athletic services and a couple other medical health services as well, a couple other ones, but transportation is the biggest part of that.
Biggest part.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Michael?
We did enrollment by town. Is there
Yes.
a trend on which town is dropping quicker?
Yeah, so there's a slight trend. So both towns are dropping at similar rates, but because Chatham's a smaller number to begin with, it's a larger percentage. I've got a chart actually that shows.
It's also a tough one. Yeah. So this year, we had barely enough Harwich kindergartners to field 4 classrooms of kindergarten. And, you know, Harwich, if we step back 10 years ago, had 6 classrooms of kindergartners every year, and it was pretty constant. And then kind of once we hit about COVID, it dropped to 5. And then suddenly, like, we could have run 3 sections of kindergarten in Harwich. You know, so 1 year doesn't make a trend. It's, you know,
Yeah.
it's trying to figure out, is it a blip or not? And, you know, we'll have to see what the enrollments look like moving forward. But there was, at least at the kindergarten level, of course, that, you know, then over the years marches, you know, up the grade levels. But, so this, in the most recent year, we saw at the entry point at Harwich Elementary, perhaps the biggest reduction. Like, I was shocked when we were sitting there thinking, okay, 5 sections of kindergarten, and it's like, 4, nope. So we did run 4 sections, but it was 4 very small sections of kindergarten.
Thank you.
So, just the next couple of slides, I just wanted to show you how we compare to other districts in terms of our expenditure, just to give you a sense of where we are, because we can tell you that we're doing the right thing, but I want to try and persuade you of that. So, this is what I have here, this chart. Unfortunately, the data's not super up to date. Actually, FY23 data came out like today, but this is FY22, and what it is for every line, or for every district, there's a line, and they're ordered from the lowest per pupil all the way up to the highest. And that's the Monomoy Regional School District in FY22. So we were 114th in the state, number 1 being the highest, and lowest was 398. So that's, so and actually I can show you some other districts. So that there's Nauset. Nauset's up here, and DY is down here, and there's the state average is just around there, and Barnstable a little lower. So, I think, given the costs we know we have faced in this part of the world, and where we want the district to be, I think that's a really defendable place to be in the state averages. We're not up, we're not spending too much on the students, but we're giving the district, the students and staff what they need to succeed in school. There is one other caveat, which is we're small, we have smaller schools and smaller districts, and that drives up your per pupil costs as well, because you're splitting like one superintendent, instead of being over 20,000 students, he's over 2,000 students. And then just to compare that to where it was in FY14, we were 94th in the state. So we're kind of right around, and then you can see the other districts around us as well. Very similar in the scheme of things to where we are right now. And then actually FY23 numbers come in, I'm just looking at it, but we're around 92, I think, this year. So we're actually up a little bit on where we've been in the last couple of years. And that's partly, I don't actually know yet why it is, because it's literally looking at data right now. But it includes, as I say, all funds, so includes grants and so on. So that might be driving it. But even still, you know, we're right around the kind of same area, the same neck of the woods. And I think that's a good place to be. And I think that helps explain where we're going with our budget.
On the grants, have there been more grants available to you since?
Overall, no. I mean, because we get so much, the ESSER funding, that's the funds we received
Yeah.
from state, was like $2 million. So that was a huge amount of money. And in addition, we received some money from the state as well. So there's been nothing like that
Okay.
again. And then what grants are available are competitive, and we're applying for them, and we're not always getting them, unfortunately. So that was expenditure. So I just wanted, the next few slides, next 4 slides, I think, is about revenue, how we're paying for it, and this is what you really care about, the assessments. And so this is the funding. So state and other revenue that we're helping to offset the budget is up 3.8%, but that's less than the budget's up, so that's why the assessments are up more than that. Our regional transportation is down 5.8%. We're using $800,000 of our excess and deficiency fund, which is a bit like free cash, a little bit like free cash. And then Harwich and Charenton assessments, as I already mentioned. I'll skip through this next slide's quick. So this just breaks down in a bit more detail. So Chapter 70, that's the primary vehicle for state funding. We also have Medicaid. We've seen an increase in interest, so we've been really working our money as best we can to get more interest, and so that's increased in the last few years, which has really helped. And as I said, transportation aid down. Now, this is based on the state budget as it is now. There will be further iterations, hopefully before the budget's finalised, and I'm hoping it might come up a little. I mean, it can also go down, but so we'll see. And if that does happen, we'll update the budget to reflect that and update the assessments. So I just wanted, like I did with the budget, I just wanted to put it in context. So this chart shows the budget by the funding source. So the total size of the bar is the budget, and then the grey part of the bar, that's the Harwich assessment. You've kind of got a light blue, which is the Chatham assessment. Yellow is excess and deficiency, and the dark blue is state funding. And you can't even see it, but there's a green in there, which is other funding, but it doesn't really show up. So back in FY16, this is when the debt for the high school came online, so that was like over $2 million, and that's why there's a big jump there. And, you know, it's interesting, it's so hard to read on this, I apologize, but you can see that there wasn't really much of a pattern in the increases in the assessments from year to year. You know, one year Chatham would be the highest, the next year would be Harwich. You know, you'd have a couple of years where they're quite similar. It was really all over the place until, if we go down here, this is the same information. I've just zoomed in on FY20 through to FY25. So I thought this was really interesting. So you can see for FY20 and 21 and 22, the Chatham assessments were much lower. In fact, in some places actually going down. On all 3 of those years were going down compared to the previous years. And then in FY20, for the FY23 budget was when we made the regional agreement change. And you can see the impact that's had on the assessment since then. So it's been a real and significant impact since then. But it's not been so you know, because that means it's not so dependent on foundation enrollment, which was driving everything else before, and it's now relates to the elementary school costs. So your first year, the first year was that big change, and then last year was kind of return to normal. This year, Chatham's a little higher. It's higher for a number of reasons. One of those reasons is that we're reopening pre-K class at Chatham, so that's been something we closed because we didn't have the numbers, and we've been trying to open it back up. So that's opened back up for next year and moves section from Harwich over to Chatham, and so some of those costs go with that. And then also, there's just a number of other fluctuations. Health insurance at Chatham is up slightly more, and because it's a smaller budget to begin with, it's a bigger increase in percentage terms.
And then on that, in terms of opening the pre-K up over in Chatham, so are you just moving staff, so you don't need more staff?
Exactly.
Thank you.
All right, I'm almost finished. This is the foundation enrollment and the minimum local contribution. So these are two factors which influence the overall assessments. So the blue line on each of these charts is foundation enrollment. And I've used the same scale so for both charts, so you can see you've got Chatham here on the left and Harwich on the right. And you can see from FY, like around about FY 17, Chatham starts to tail off, but it really kind of picks up in the decline from FY 19. Harwich is similar. We have FY 19, it starts to tail off, but these slopes are really similar in size, but you're starting from a much higher number here, which is why even, you know, the percentage change year to year is less for Harwich than for Chatham. And then foundation, the green bar, the orange bar is the minimum local contribution, which is the number the state sets based on a town's ability to pay, and that's based on property prices and tax bases. And it I won't go into detail how it influences the assessment because it's so complicated, but basically the part of the assessment is kind of this number is assessed to both towns to start with, and how that changes therefore impacts your assessment. So Chatham's has been kind of increased, but has been relatively level, even it's gone down from 24 to 25, whereas Harwich's minimum local contribution just keeps going up. And so that also impacts the assessments, but not so much this year. In fact, so this chart is just a little, look back. So if we were still using the previous regional assessment methodology, where we were just using foundation enrollment for majority of the costs, it'd be like, this estimate is it would have it $1.1 million more assessed to Harwich. So I think that's another good news story. You know, we recognised, you know, districts and the district and the towns recognised there was an issue, came up with a solution, and the solution has had a direct, real impact on the assessment figures. And that number will get bigger because if you look back, before we made the change, these were the sort of number changes to the Chatham assessment. So if we'd kept going at that, the number would have got, you know, the gap would have just got, you know, where it would have been, would have got lower and lower, and where we ended up is going to hopefully, well, will increase. That said, you know, things can change, and I might be back here telling you a different story next year, depending on where the assessments go and enrollment goes and the state numbers go. But, but so far, 3 years, that seems to be working out. And that's it. So that's our budget request and the assessments.
Okay, questions from board members. Michael?
I have no questions at this time. Thank you for the great presentation
Thank you very much.
and all your answers that questions we've already asked.
Got one for you though.
Thank you.
I'll get back to you though.
Okay,
on the-
yep.
Jeff?
Nope. Thank you for all your work.
Don?
You're going to be surprised, but very good presentation.
Thank you.
No, and I think you've answered all my questions as well, so we'll wait to hear from you. And when do your negotiations close out? When do you expect?
So the negotiations we don't. So choosing my words carefully.
Yeah.
However, the negotiations we do not expect that to impact this budget.
Okay.
The only changes left now is that from somebody other than you or Chatham Board, Select Board or the school committee now would be if the state changes the numbers. And there is a small update due to the foundation enrollment number, like a 0.something% that might change numbers, but really small dollars. And if they do, you know, I did hear we might get slightly more money in transportation reimbursement, which would be great. And that would just help to reduce it. But if anything changes significantly, we'll let you know.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Madam Chair?
Sorry.
Madam Chair? Madam Chair, Mark Kelleher, I have a question.
Hold on, Mark. I was going to Joe Powers. Go ahead, Joe.
Okay, I'm sorry.
So I
Sorry, Joe.
believe the number we see on the slide right now, that 29 million plus, that was your number based on what you presented to the school committee on February 8th?
Yep.
What's the rest of your calendar? When do you expect that number to solidify?
So March 14th is when we take the final vote. And all things being equal, I would expect it to be similar to what it is
Thank you, Michael. Yes, go ahead, Mark.
Okay, thanks, Madam Chair. Dr. Carpenter, the feasibility study that you have for the middle school, who does that, and what kind of information does the feasibility study provide?
So the feasibility study, what Mr. Keller is referring to is if we were going to the MSBA's program to redo the roof, the first phase of that, they call it a feasibility study, which I wish they would come up with some other name because it sounds like you're just saying the feasibility of replacing the roof. We know it's feasible, but actually what it involves is they look for what the options are. They get architectural plans, they get the design, including the architectural plans, and it goes out, they prepare all the procurement documents. It also includes identifying a project manager, which is required under mass procurement law, and a designer. And basically you get, in this program, I think it's still done this way, you just get assigned one. The MSBA have a list of vendors who they use for OPMs and a list who they use for designers, and they just give you, I think it gets pulled out a hat, and you just get given those. They've pre-qualified them, so they're all ones I've worked with in this program are really high quality. I mean, it's costly going through the MSBA program because there's a lot of hoops you have to jump through, but you get a really good result at the end of it. They really make sure it's high quality. So, sorry, the short answer is you're assigned an architect or designer by the MSBA.
Great. Thank you, Michael. Does that answer your question, Mark?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Thank you. So thanks for coming. We appreciate your time. And Scott, a speedy, well, I know it hasn't been speedy, but
Yeah.
continued recovery.
Just
So,
glad to be here.
yeah, well, glad to see you.
In May.
Yeah.
Elevator's there.
Yeah.
Scott, my son, neither one of my kids did that to you at school, did they?
It was not work related.
Yeah, that work was comp. Just checking.
Thank you for
Thank
putting
And
it
you're grateful for that, right?
I tripped over a roller skate.
Looks like Wyatt's work.
No. It's rough. Now we will go to our vote, yeah,
Yeah.
thanks.
I move that we vote to approve the fiscal year 2025 budget with recommendation to Finance Committee.
Anybody seconded?
I will not. Want to have discussion first?
Well, I was waiting to see if we had a second first, and now I will ask about discussion. Dawn? Oh, Joe, sorry, did you want to?
Yeah, just to say that your discussion this evening, whatever you end up transmitting to the Finance Committee, comports with the requirements of the Harwich Charter under Chapter 9. That on or before the fourth Tuesday in February, the Select Board shall, with or without amendment, send a budget on. As you know, we have our budget roundtable this Saturday, March 2nd.
Yep.
And as you also know, the charter requires the Finance Committee at some point to hold a public hearing. So you'll go through an act tonight. It does not compel the board to stick with that budget or
Right.
future numbers as your process goes forward,
It's just to send it to finance.
to meet the obligations of
Right.
the charter.
Yep. Dawn?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I mean, I'd feel comfortable sending it over as a draft, but we're in a line item budget state, and we have never had a walkthrough of particularly the major budgets in terms of all of the constituent numbers that are below it. We've got headline numbers. I don't really know what the budget is in terms of what it was built from, because a budget isn't built from the top down, it's built from the bottom up. So I could see myself voting to refer this as a draft, but we really need to set aside some time for us before the warrant's printed, for us to understand what all the constituent elements are of this.
Right. Well, we're going to have conversations as well on Saturday, so. Any other discussion? Jeff?
No, I'm
Michael?
listening.
I would say draft would definitely be the language that I would use, and that would just be to comply with the charter.
Right.
And finance director's in the room, and I thank her for the 31-page response to my questions. I still have a lot of questions and a lot of answers that I was trying to extrapolate out of all of the information. But I'm still questioning the same ones I was questioning before, and wonder when the opportunity is for the board to discuss things like the finance department's or treasurer collector contract, and removing that from the budget, as Selectman Handler said, that contract could be paid out of the salary and wages. So I would expect that eventually from the town administrator, that we'll have a solution to that problem.
Right.
But not voting a contract in a future budget. Recreation and youth, which I've brought up, it was in the information received, but there's still about $25,000 in that expense that appears to me to be an enhancement of services. If it is an enhancement of services, I would ask that we take that out of the budget, along with that contract, before we transfer that to the finance committee. And a lot of the items in that $25,000 and above that line look like, to me, revolving fund expenses. So if it's not, I would like an actual explanation. I was able on one of the higher budgets to go to the elected official today and get the Munis report, where they enter into Munis what their budget is and their request, and that would be one that I asked, that I said I didn't have a problem with based on the amount of elections we were having this year. But it was a really handy document, because all the notes and justification as to why the budget was up was right there on the Munis report. So I will be asking finance tomorrow for 5 or 6 Munis reports, and hope that they have the same level of explanation in there, and that will answer my questions. But I don't have the information right now to be comfortable with the budget at all. I would actually also like to understand from the assessing department when the Board of Assessors will vote the overlay surplus, because it's my understanding that we're looking at between $300,000 and $400,000, which we normally have a revenue line item on, which will make a drastic change in this budget, and one that we may actually be able to then have a conversation about enhancement of services.
Right.
So I would like to understand when that vote's gonna be and when that number's gonna be there. I do have a couple questions, Julie, if you'll indulge. And
Sure,
maybe
go
we
ahead.
maybe we can get the answers, but sources and uses page, are the items under the FY24 actuals from 6/20/23 or estimates from FY24 budget, or a combination? That would be the first question.
Madam Chair,
Yes, sure.
just for,
Just say your name and all that for the record.
Kathleen Barrett, Finance Director.
Good evening.
Good evening, members of the board, Madam Chair.
Good evening.
I realize it's a great deal of information, but try to put it in different presentations. The sources and uses in
Yes,
FY24, that is actual.
actuals, thank you. Estimated local receipts up 900,000. What were the actuals from last year, and what is this projection based on?
The actual local receipts last year was the 15,425,923. That's actual. The 16,307,350, that is, it's the same categories of local receipts, so it's motor vehicles, rooms, meals, it's building permits, miscellaneous revenue, departmental revenue, and recreation revenue. So that is a slight increase, given what's been vetted through looking at, estimated to actual from last year, and what the departments have thought would be a reasonable. I can give you the breakdown of what that is. I thought it was included, but it may not have been. But I can provide the detail of that.
That would be fine, and that would be fine in an email as well. Julie, I would defer before I ask my last few if you want to.
Oh, yeah, Noreen, hi, how are you?
So Noreen doesn't have to stand.
Thank you. Noreen Donahue, Headwaters. I didn't want to interrupt the board discussion, but also I don't want you to get so far
Yeah,
ahead in
no, that's
topics
fine.
that. So my problem with, not a problem, my question regarding local receipts was in the breakdowns I see, the number that's listed under FY '23 actuals is 17.1 million. The number that's listed for FY '24 estimated is 15.4 million. So Kathleen, when you say that the FY '24 on the sources and uses are actuals, that doesn't line up with this page.
Sure, I can give you a quick explanation. FY '23 was the beginning of the split of the rooms tax.
Was the what, dear? I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
It's the split between the one that was voted for the special purpose stabilization funds for affordable housing and wastewater. So a little over $900,000 from local receipts is no longer included in local receipts. It's appropriated to special purpose stabilization funds. So you're going to have a decrease in local receipts.
Right. But I understand there's a decrease.
So that's why it's considerable decrease.
It wasn't that so much. I'm trying to figure out which is the right number to use for the basis. So let me try it a different way. So you're saying the FY '23 actual that's listed included 900,000?
Yeah, the FY '23 of $919,639 in the rooms tax, that is the net number.
Right.
Corresponding amount of $919,639 was transferred to special purpose stabilization funds.
Right, got that. That's fine. What I'm trying to say, though, is, so for the total of 17.1, if we deducted 10% from that, the amount would be the 15.4. And don't quote me on these, but I remember discussions from last year when we talked about that our estimated receipts, that we didn't want to go over 90%. We wanted to try to stay conservative as much as we could, and we didn't want to go over 90% of a fair guess, let me put it that way. So if 90% of the 17.1, to me, comes out to 15.4, but yet on the FY '25, on the sources and uses, it's 16.3. So I'm just trying to find out which is the base number. Do we go from the 15.4 that's listed under the FY '24 column on the sources and uses, or do we go from the 17.1 that's listed as the FY '23 actual?
I wasn't privy to conversations like before my tenure about what the arrangement was for percentages, but year to year, it's a measured, analysis of what we're seeing. This particular local receipt analysis, this was back, the FY '24 here, I apologize, it wasn't completely updated. There was a lot moving. We had made some increases to the FY '24 estimated based on a further review. So this first spreadsheet, is this what you're looking at?
Right.
That FY '24 has increased based on conversations with the town administrator and the department heads. We went back and looked at it again because of the large increases in our expenses and thought that would be, we try to do reasonable, of course. We're not going to over-extenuate on local receipts. Because if you don't make them, then you have to raise it on the recap. So, obviously, these are all estimates. This is what we're trying to do. We're trying to find a most reasonable estimate, though. This is just kind of shows the history of where things come from. But in FY '23, there's a, it's a decrease from '22, obviously,
Yes.
because it was a reallocation of
Not my
funds.
concern, yeah.
Okay,
So I'm really just trying to understand, in general, the methodology, and it's not within my pay grade, so I'll leave it in the very capable laps of the Select Board. But there was a discussion last year, and perhaps if you could remind us what the penalties are should we exceed our estimated local receipts from the state.
It's not necessarily a penalty from the state. You don't get punished per se. You just have a shortage of receipts of which you'd have to evaluate. And if there was a tremendous deficit, you have to raise it on the recap. That's why you keep a conservative estimate. You know, I wouldn't put forth numbers that I thought were completely unattainable, because it's not realistic. It's, you know, it's not gonna serve any of us well. So that's the goal, is to have it be a number, but still, you know, try to have something that gives us a little bit more flexibility because of, you know, the demands for the budget.
All right, so I'll just complete for my understanding as a layperson, so the number that we're kind of basing this on then, Kathleen, is the 17.1, is that correct? And the number of 16.7 trails off of that, not off of the 15.4?
It's not an actual, like, hard formula. It's
Yeah.
based on receipts, and a lot of it was looking at what our current receipts are in FY '24. So in looking at '24's receipts now to see if these estimates are reasonable, now that we're further along, we can see what the actuals of '24 look like. We have half a year, a little bit over, of revenue recorded. It helps us, give us a little bit more flexibility with those. You know, again, nothing, you know, there was a rate increase. There'll be a rate increase for golf. That kind of helps with the departmental, you know, receipt increase, things like that nature. We do look at, you know, there's increase in, you know, some of the meals tax. You know, unfortunately, when dinner's more expensive, the tax is more expensive. So there are some incremental increases that we felt like, as the time from like the beginning of this process to now, it was reasonable to increase it a little bit.
Do we normally see an increase in the second quarter?
Yeah, I mean, with nicer
Second
weather,
half, I guess I
yeah,
should
yeah.
say.
Motor vehicle excise, when that's billed out, that's a very large component of our local receipts, and, but you don't really see that collection until, like, you know, mid to late spring. So it's kind of almost into May that you really start to see, you know, all of that collection coming through. So it is hard to really gauge where you are at actually, you know, at this point in time, because that's such a big component. You know, it's, you know, $2.5 million. So, you know, we haven't collected it yet. So,
Right.
but, you know, year after year.
But you're looking at previous years to make that estimate.
It's a realistic, you know, estimate to say that, you know, consistently motor vehicle excise will continue. There's nothing, you know, economically or, you know, like outside forces that would say you'd have a tremendous downturn in people's ability to pay their excise tax.
Right.
You know, if you thought, you know, there was something looming, you could, but.
Did you have a follow-up, Noreen?
Well, not a follow-up, really. I'm just going to say so that I shouldn't look at the FY '23 actuals, really. It's really based more on an analysis of this year, the current year.
Well, FY '23 is one of the components that's taken into account. It's not the only factor.
Right, and, but yet, even though your estimated is 15.4, we're willing to go up $1 million based on, I mean, I'm not saying that's a bad thing, I'm just saying we're willing to go up $1 million over what we estimated.
Yes. That's where we stand today, yes.
As I say, in your capable hands.
Thank you, Noreen.
Linda Sabula, Harwich Board. Is there ever going to be presented the detailed breakout of what that 16,307 is for estimated local receipts in this potential budget? I mean, I went through this packet and I saw no information on what the 16 million is. I see the 15,425, which is FY '24, but I don't see a column here that says budget FY '25 and would come down to 16,307, 350. So hopefully that'll be in a future packet.
It will.
That would be great, thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Michael?
Just on my last, and I believe we discussed it today, was on the harbor master's budget. and referring to an old article, so it's probably another conversation. And I know that's only kicking the can down the road because of what the county's doing with the dredging rates, but wondering if it's possible to reduce that budget by the amount left in that article from last year and use that money this year. And certainly can wait till we have the article discussion and later to figure out if there's a way to do that. I know we need a new appropriation at town meeting, but it would be great to reduce where we can reduce and where we already have the appropriation.
I think that may be baked in if you're looking at sources and uses, interfund transfers. I think we had accounted for dredge money.
Yes, there was a harbor improvement and waterways funds. The interfund transfers includes $200,000, a little over from that. We had made some changes at the very last minute, so.
Okay.
But that does not take into account like a capital article that was previously voted at a town meeting that may have funds you want to reappropriate.
And that's more what I'm talking about than the interfund
Yeah.
transfer. And I'm only saying if it's possible, I'm not saying, but it would be great to be able to reduce that budget, knowing that we're gonna have to go up again
Right.
next year. But on a year like this, if we can find some money, it would be great to find the money.
Well, we can also have a conversation with John, too, on Saturday.
Thank you, that's all I have for now.
Thank you. Jeff, do you have anything?
I do. I only have one question as of now. Kathleen, thank you for being here. For my own information, Cranberry Valley has a restaurant. That restaurant has a lease, I assume?
It's
Yeah.
if I may, it's a license agreement.
Yeah.
It's a license agreement. What is the term of that existing license agreement?
It is a 3-year term with an option, and I believe I have a follow-up meeting this week with the current purveyor to talk about the option year.
Great.
With or without equipment.
Well, that was my next question is.
I didn't hear.
Yeah, no, I'll ask it. Thank you. Is the equipment in the restaurant a town asset or not a town asset?
I believe it's a mixture. There are elements that our golf director identified as town versus elements that came from a prior vendor, and the town was interested in having the new vendor purchase that. But I can have the golf director give greater information on that.
That'd be great, and I'd love to get follow-up information on that from you, Joe, if I could. Thank you.
Don?
Nothing.
Nothing?
Other than to say, if you would change the motion to send over the draft budget, I'd be happy to vote for it.
I think that's what I said in the first place, Don, but I'll make it again if you'd like. I vote to approve the draft budget
And send it over.
and send it over, the draft budget for the fiscal year of 2025, with recommendations to the Finance Committee, and send it to the Finance Committee.
That was your second. You originally seconded the first motion.
No, I didn't.
No, I don't think anyone did.
No,
It
didn't
was
get
left open, it never got
Okay,
seconded.
I thought you did because there wasn't any second.
And I think I heard you say that you moved to approve sending a draft budget
A draft budget
to the finance
to the
committee.
Finance Committee, that's.
That's what it is.
Well, then
It's
I'll
a
second-
draft.
I'll
It's
second
not the,
that.
or, it's
It is. the
a draft.
I'll second that.
It's a draft 2025 budget to send to the Finance Committee, as we do normally, and that's what's on the agenda. So,
Exactly
we
what I
have
said.
a motion
I'll second.
and a second.
I did.
Is there any further discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Painful.
I vote to approve the following special permits pending Health Department.
Thank you, Kathleen, sorry.
Thank you.
I move to approve the following special permits pending Health Department approval. Sharon Holly, DBA Sedona Summers, one-day entertainment and wines and malt permit, March 8th, 2024, and March 29th, 2024, 204 Sisson Road, 4 p.m. to 7 p.m., live music. As well as Abigail Dudley, one-day entertainment and wines and malt permit, March 9, 2024, 204 Sisson Road, 6 p.m. to 9 p.m., trivia.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
4-0, Joe.
Madam Chair?
Yes?
I apologize. I think what got lost in the shuffle, sorry, thank you for the action on item D. I have 2 forms for you folks to sign based on that. But if we could go back to the overall concept of the fiscal year 2025 budget. Following the information that was provided by the finance director in your packet, was in fact a draft agenda for your Saturday session with the finance committee. So I just wanted to ask if the board had any questions, changes, or anything. Otherwise, I will transmit this draft agenda along with the budget documents to the finance committee for Saturday.
That's fine. Is there any problem with that?
My only comment, and I hate to put the town clerk on the spot again, but we have early voting on Saturday. And I think it'd be a pretty tall ask to ask the clerk to leave early voting and come to our meeting. So I would think, and I would let the clerk speak for herself, but maybe we see the clerk at a different time. But her call, not ours.
Good evening again. We do have election requirements on Saturday, so if possible, I'd be happy to join you for a discussion on the clerk's office proposed FY25 budget at a future meeting, and would of course extend the same to the finance committee.
Sure. Thank you, Emily.
Thank you.
For the record, if I may, certainly not March 4th.
Certainly not.
Yep, so anytime after that,
Yeah.
perhaps. Yep. So we can make a note, bring that back at a future meeting.
Yeah, sure. So we voted on the,
B is done.
yeah.
With the personnel.
So old business, approve the personnel bylaw management compensation table that we talked about last week, which was simply discussion on the grade, the proposed grade, just to be clear. So is there any discussion on that item? Sorry, I didn't mean to take that.
I'm so happy you did, Madam Chair.
Don?
Thank you, Madam Chair. In pondering this over the past week and keep staring at the table, we have to have a bigger discussion on this, because at least two of the people who are going to wind up becoming subordinate to this have a span of control of management of employees that would far outstrip the person that's going to be making more than them, significantly more than them. So I can't support it as it is right now. I would rather have a bigger discussion about the whole context, because we are potentially taking away something. And that personnel slot, I want to be careful not to say it's the person. That personnel slot is going to wind up making more than either the water wastewater superintendent or the DPW director, and I have a problem with it.
So the only thing I'll point out, and I'll go to the other members, is this is our third time talking about it, and I haven't gotten any request for additional info or anything. So you can give me whatever direction you're looking at later. Jeff?
I'm going to defer to Michael.
Michael?
Just looking for my notes. I would agree that I think we need more time, and thank you, Julie. I know I gave you some information, and I would thank Assistant Town Administrator Megan Eldridge for all of the information that we received, which was a lot more than we had the week before. And looking at the compensation table and the memo, and looking at digesting her memo, even Megan says, as actual salary figures are obtained, I will update the spreadsheet. So I don't think, even based on the memo we received from Megan, that we're ready to vote this. Given the position that's changing, and I would look to Joe, I think we have to be very careful about what we discuss in a public meeting. And this is a compensation table, but it affects one employee. And the intent originally came from me, which was suggesting that our assistant town administrator should make more. And I would argue now that there's a mechanism in the current table with a recommendation of her direct supervisor, there's room in the current table to accomplish what I originally asked for. So, not trying to kick the can down the road, but I do see a path, and it is personnel related, and I would again look to Joe to say it would be more appropriate, given that we are talking about an employee and one of his, that we'd be doing that in executive session. I have a couple technical questions based on the compensation table and what might be lost by said employee if we voted this table. But once we vote this table, we are actually voting to give somebody a raise. And I think based on the memo that's in the packet, there's more work to be done on this, and I'm not sure we can do it in open session.
Jeff?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. A lot of what Michael said, I certainly understand the genesis of how we got here. And I want to make it really clear, I fully support the reason behind why we're having this discussion. I think we're wildly premature, and I think there needs to be a lot more put into this, because I also feel it's incredibly important, not only for the employees, but for the town as a whole. So I'm not.
So I'm gonna, no, I
Yeah,
appreciate your
no,
comments.
thank
And
you.
so this was, as Michael said, put on an agenda at his request. So at this point, I would say that we will bring this back, and let's give it sufficient time to bring it back. So that's where I think the discussion ends. Unless you're Michael McCaskill and you have one more thing to say.
I mean, I gotta take advantage of time to talk. Several of what I just said pointed to the town administrator and the correct process so that we don't violate any personnel records. I'm not interested in pushing this thing onto a shelf forever, and the intent was there for a reason, but that intent needs to be supported by the town administrator. As far as voting a new compensation table, sure, we can talk about that in public and we can all give our ideas, but I would defer back. That doesn't fall on me, doesn't fall on another board member to come back. It falls on the report that we got stating that they need more information. So, and I would like more information on that. Back to the original thing, can we talk about this in executive session, Joe, as it relates to an employee? And I would further by saying, in the current classification table, there is room, if supported by the town administrator, to elevate said employee.
Joe?
Sure, I'll give it a shot. The compensation and classification table that appears in the personnel bylaws is the purview of the select board. The personnel bylaws state that only you can make changes to it, however it's presented to you. So you could adopt a personnel bylaw compensation and classification table that shows a grade 10, devoid of any position. As you may know, in years past, there were grades without positions in them. So that would show the growth as articulated by our assistant town administrator, how the grades are presently regardless of the position, meaning the delta between them is roughly 8%. And then within a grade line, there's a delta of about 2.5% between each step. So you could amend your personnel bylaws class and comp table to establish a grade 10. You could rely upon the figures within that. Then, separate and distinct, you can have a conversation, and I would recommend that it be an executive session, if you want to talk about a specific individual's salary, not just the position of assistant town administrator or title. So there's a few options you have.
Thank you, Joe. Michael?
Okay, just so we don't throw this on a shelf and never talk about it again, I'd be looking for a complete, if we're gonna go that route, I'd be looking for a complete study on salaries for those positions in that compensation table, and not just the limited information that we have and a few towns mentioned, because it doesn't come close to doing justice, in my mind, to picking the starting salary level on the grade 10 position.
Well, I think on terms of the grade, if I heard Joe correctly and understood him correctly, the question really isn't then about that position. It's about that grade for whatever positions may fall into that grade. Did I understand that correctly, Joe?
That's what I was trying to say, yes.
Right. So it's not necessarily about a specific position at all. It's about a new grade level so that there's some more flexibility to move.
If I'm reading the chart correctly, grade 10, that position on that compensation table is the only position in that grade
Right.
10.
But now we're talking about creating a grade versus doing anything for any particular position. That's the only point I'm trying to make, is that now we're talking about creating a grade versus putting a position in that grade. It's creating another grade level. So we can bring this back with whatever additional information is, but what my point to you is that if you're looking for more information in addition to what is in the packet, I think ultimately we're looking for some additional, more general information, not just specifically for the ATA position.
I'll send you a email with what I'd be looking for, so that we don't have to exhaust everybody but being here. But as I'm looking at the red line chart presented by administration, the grade that we're putting in place is an M10.
Right.
And that only has one name next to it.
Right, but current.
So it seems pretty obvious
So
to
that
me
was
what we're
because
trying to
the
do.
original intent was at the request when you asked for an agenda item, and this is how it was addressed. So that's my point, is now we're taking that off the table if we want to create a grade, to Joe's point. If we want to table the whole thing and get more information in general, then I hear you, and that's what we would do. But what I'm saying is we're having two different discussions at this point.
With all
So,
due respect, I have no idea what you just said.
well,
The
then,
chart that I'm looking at, that we're being asked to vote on.
So with
has
all due
one
respect,
thing,
Michael.
M10, Assistant Town Administrator.
understood, that's
Incomplete
what the
salary
discussion
survey.
was.
So I will wait, and I will email you what I'm looking.
You should email me what you need.
Thank you.
In that regard, and we will decide what type of action we're taking with the grade. I'm saying that there's two different thoughts here, one that came to this agenda under a certain request made by you, and now what we're saying over here is that we can still move forward with creating a grade without specifically identifying what position will go in that grade. So to me, they're two different conversations, so let's get it clear what information we're bringing back.
Make
That's
no
my
mistake
point.
about it. My request was very crystal clear and for a
In-
reason, and a
in
mechanism
regard.
already exists.
In
It was the
regard to that
recommendation of
specific.
administration to change the compensation table.
For a specific position.
But
And that's where
mine-
we're not having
My
that
request already
conversation.
exists.
And your request for any additional information, you can send to me. Thanks. Discussion on articles for the 2024 annual town meeting.
It was the previous one, sorry. I'm so happy to see adjustments made in a positive way to our employees, because those of us who've been here for a while know we lost a lot of good employees for salary reasons over the last 10 years. So I think, despite it'll be difficult, I think that's a good thing. But there was something in the memo from a week ago that accompanied that table that bothered me. And as hard as I try, I can't not mention it. And in that memo, the last line, the memo from the TA, said, "This position is responsible for overseeing all department heads in the absence of the town administrator, as well as taking on the responsibilities of an absent department head." And, I certainly don't want to get into any specific.
I really would ask that we don't talk about anything
I'm not going
specific.
to.
Okay.
But when I'm just going to tell you my opinion, that I can't see anybody taking over the responsibilities of the police chief, the fire chief, or the water wastewater director. And so words matter. That's only words in a memo, but they'll get repeated. And that's just my opinion. If you think that position, the ATA, is intended to take over the responsibilities of the police chief, the fire chief, or the water wastewater superintendent, I'm very surprised. The lower position, the ones lower, I shouldn't say lower positions, the ones that are compensated at a lower level, I can understand that. But I just wanted to say that I think that's a not true statement. Thank you.
Thank you. So back to the discussion on articles for the 2024 annual town meeting.
So, Madam Chair, members of the board, what you have in your, what you should have in your packet is the current list of known articles that are referred to as standard warrant articles, the list of potential warrant articles, as well as, I believe, recent communication that the chair received regarding potential articles on a possible human resources director. So you've had conversation in meetings past about the, if I may say, the size of the warrant, you know, things that can be combined, things that may not be combined. So I would just defer back to the memo of February 9th and answer any questions of the board. I identified 2 specific articles in that memo. I think, and it's helpful to have some of the folks that are here tonight, probably one of the most we could have a discussion on is potentially a water infrastructure investment fund, or a WIF, because I think that will help the town greatly as we go forward in our watershed management plan and future construction phases. Be that as it may, I'd be ready, willing, and able to answer any questions, comments, or how you want to proceed on articles.
Does anyone have any specific way they want to go about the article discussion? Do we want to start with the discussion on the WIF? Don?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was actually going to ask you that, is that we're doing this linearly from the top to the bottom, because there's one that I'd like to pick off right away, is, while I very much appreciate Senator Sears' appearance here and his comments, and I don't think there's anybody that is more enthusiastic about funding attainable housing than me. Not that I'm better than everybody, but I don't think there's anybody who cares more about it. Before we start talking about a tax on people who have a house that's worth $1 million in an environment where the inflation has driven up the average cost of a house in this town to about 2/3 of that, I think we need to be really careful and have a public discussion about this, because it's not something I really feel that we just throw on a town meeting warrant and see how they feel.
Oh, we could have time to do that in the fall if we're going to.
That's what I'm suggesting. I think it's like premature. The public really should be engaged in this discussion because it affects anybody that's going to want to sell a house.
Any other discussion on that yet, Jeff?
Yeah, I'd like to support exactly that, Don. I think, my opinion is I'd like to know how much money we could potentially generate. I'd like to know where it would go. I think public input would be a big help before this hits town meeting floor. So I support that.
I agree.
Okay, so why don't we take that off the list for now?
That's one thing.
Yeah, one down. Do we want to go forward with discussion on the WIF while we have Dan and Gary here, so we don't elongate their night any further?
I'd like to
Do you
hear.
have anything you want?
Yeah, could they explain it? Because I know what it is, but this is a geeky thing.
Yeah.
Do you want to, Dan? Oh, Michael?
Sure.
Without
Yeah,
setting them
Joe.
up, Joe is perfectly ready for this one.
Thank you. I can
No,
certainly.
I know you're ready. I was
Yeah.
just saying if they want, if we would go
You
to
want to
that.
explain Thank you.
Just that if we would go to that discussion now.
Sure. But I think generally speaking, what the WIF gets to is it's a funding mechanism that the town can rely upon. There's actions required through town meeting, so that's why the select board may be the initiators of this, to get something on the warrant. The bigger discussion beyond the WIF, or within the WIF, I should say, is how you would populate that water investment and infrastructure fund. And again, as it says in the memo, I believe water is used interchangeably with wastewater. I would ask the superintendent, was it the town of Dennis that we know that implemented this a few years back? Town of Yarmouth, right? And so there are at least 2 towns on Cape Cod that have already done this. And there's thought about the amount that you earmark, which can be up to 3%. At least one of those towns, I believe it was the town of Yarmouth, decided that they would impact upon their Community Preservation Act percentage. I think they, for example, say, don't know the particulars for Yarmouth, but they went from 3% to 2% on their CPA and redirected that 1% to populate the WIF going forward. But the overall concept that I think we want to talk about is the WIF, along with our special purpose stabilization funds and all of the grants and SRF funding and all that our superintendent pursues is a solid way for the town to convey to the residents that as we progress beyond phase 3, we also have identified funding sources. And building a WIF in the way that I just described, in my opinion, and I'll look around, would not constitute a tax increase. It is a redirect of an existing tax. Now, that's easy for me to say without the Community Preservation Committee present, but that's also not the only way that you can populate the WIF. Regardless, there are actions that need to be taken by the Select Board ahead of town meeting to make this conversation go forward.
Thanks, Joe. Don?
Thank you, Madam Chair. What I'm trying to do is somewhat demystify this. So I get populate and all that stuff, but really, in terms of the public, it really boils down to where we're going to get the money from this to put into that bucket. It's really simple.
Just from my experience in Sandwich, they were the first one who did it. So what it is, it's CPA is a surcharge on tax. It's a percentage. WIF is done the exact same manner. So it is a surcharge. So you can adjust the percentages of surcharge. I think Sandwich did. They went from 3 to 2 to CPA and 2 for WIF. So there was a 1% increase. You know, obviously, that's their town, their choice. But that was how the allocation was. And then the funds are they're designated in the fund, recorded in the same manner as you do with a CPA fund. It's very, very similar. So it's not necessarily like populating funds. Like you're not like taking the money. It's just it goes on the tax bill. It'd be a separate line. You'd have your real estate, you'd have CPA, and then it just comes up. It literally says WIIF. There are some logistical considerations for when we want to implement that at some point in time, whatever year it's going to be. Would be a new component of the billing process through Munis. So it's not like an easy thing to push a button. It would require some research on our part. So to be fair to everybody involved, it would just require a little bit of research on how to implement that because it's a separate line and it's got to calculate in a certain way to make adjustments. So,
Is there any other hoop that we have to jump through regulation-wise to go from 2, if it's 2, to 1 being diverted over to the WIF?
yeah, I can defer to Joe. Like my experience was, and he's done a lot of research on it, and I spoke with John Giorgio about it, in both places, who's town council, and, it's specific language in the articles of which, how there's a very specific language, what you reference and how it's done and how the adjustments are made.
Okay.
Certainly defer to the legal expert.
Okay. Thank you.
This is something that dates back to our former finance director, Carol Capola. It was conversations that Carol and I with wastewater superintendent and others were kicking around about 4 years ago. So council has already established the framework. And to what our present finance director was saying, the act that's covered in a draft article is for the town to accept Mass General Laws, Chapter 40, Section 39M. And that, by doing that, by town meeting accepting that statutory act, we are then creating a special municipal WIF, or Municipal Water Infrastructure Investment Fund. Then within the body of the email, it talks about the various purposes that you can use for the appropriations that come from that. So it could be maintenance, improvements, and investments to municipal drinking, wastewater, and stormwater. So that's standard language that comes from that statute. So council has written it, a draft, years ago, in such a way that it can be open-ended, but it would be known as the municipal WIF. Further, it talks about that, in this example, that a property tax surcharge, as the finance director has said, the requirements of the statute limit it. You can only go up to 3% on your percentage, however you derive that property tax surcharge. Further, the discussion on it back then was whatever annual town meeting adopts it, none of this would occur until the next full fiscal year. So the draft language right now would say that The taxes assessed would be for fiscal year 2026, which would begin no earlier than July 1st, 2025. Now, for me, having our wastewater superintendent and members of the wastewater commission here, what could be helpful is, we may not need it necessarily in place for fiscal year 2026. We may want to have it in place for 27, or we may not contemplate using those funds for several years. But again, the whole purpose of this is to try to give comfort that in years past where there has not been a cogent funding mechanism,
Right.
there's now a cogent funding mechanism.
So, back to the fact that we just tabled one till the fall, is this something that you would say move forward with the spring, or that you would?
My recommendation is if you're going to do this, it is something that, in my personal opinion, is suitable for your annual town meeting, the one that everyone's used to in a May. Prior boards had talked about potentially doing it a special, and there was not, I think, a stomach for that. I think the bigger question is, you want to give as much notice, A, that you're contemplating it, and then B, when this will change, if it does, on the property taxes.
Thank you, Joe. Did you have a question?
I did, just how would we properly inform the public on this prior to town meeting? So that they understand exactly what we're trying to accomplish here.
Well, I mean, the warrant, but that's,
Like the
Not
article that we just chopped out, I think information to the public would be important.
yeah, which is why I was asking about the fall.
Got it.
Don?
Actually, thank you, Madam Chair. That's what I was going to say to support the fall.
But if it has to
We
be.
always have to remember that we're not spending our own money. I mean, it's coming from taxes, and half of the discussion we're having right now is where it's going to go. All commendable, because the Clean Waters Board up in the county, we've all been discussing this for a couple of years. My problem is that at least one of the paths would delete a certain portion of the CPC money that is going to projects right now, where at a time when the state has been steadily over the last 10 years ratcheting down what they were matching us with. So the public would have to say, it's kind of like your own house budget. I appreciate that we've been spending it on this and this, but I'd really like to put aside some for that. It's not just how commendable it is to spend it, it's where's it coming from, and you're willing to give up something over here that you had already.
I guess just my clarification that I just heard from you, though, was that it should happen at an annual town meeting. Is that correct?
Right, again,
Yeah.
because for me, annual is the meeting.
Right.
Everything that we read about in the statutes requires municipalities in Massachusetts to have an annual town meeting between April and June. And so that's guaranteed to happen. Specials are not guaranteed to happen. Furthermore, I would offer that, in my professional opinion, you do the big things at your annual town meeting.
Understood.
Again, if I may, the percentage is up to 3%. Where it comes from, it would be the select board deciding how to tax the public. So it is a policy decision, it is a political decision, no doubt, if you want to take that from CPA or other funds, or if you want to create a new property tax surcharge. And further, you can determine the start date.
Thank you, Joe. Michael?
I think it's the responsible thing to do, and this isn't a new conversation. The only question I really have is, do we have to decide, to form the WIF, do we have to decide what the funding source is going to be at the same time? Or can we do another town meeting to then try and look at CPA funds? Last conversation we had about this was related to land bank debt dropping off, and then they're having an ability, at least, without raising CPC tax, because maybe if we passed the millionaire tax a little while ago, we could have funded it with that. But can we do this and get the WIF set up without dedicating a funding source to get it done?
I don't believe so, but I can double check with council. Again, everything that I've read that the state has available talks about, one, you must accept that statute to allow you to create this fund. Further, you identify the uses for those funds, Third, you identify the source that the funds are gonna be derived from. And fourth, you say when it's gonna start. So those appear to be the four elements of that article. I can run it by council again to ask that, if we could do, for lack of a better phrase, a two-step.
It'd be great to run it by council. I think it would also be great to run it through CPC and let them have an opportunity to speak about it, and the water wastewater superintendent. If we can get that done and there's some sort of consensus, I would agree with the annual. If we're not gonna get that done and don't have that support, I think we wait.
So at this point, that's an article that requires further discussion. Might as well move to, I guess my other question on the petition articles, those are the only ones that we could move along in this, because unless anyone has another article they want to talk about prior to the petition articles. Michael?
We did discuss combining 17 through 31, and it would probably be something else that we would want to talk to CPC about, but I know a past chair has supported that, is combining the CPC articles into one article, similar to what we did with capital items last year, and it seemed to go very well at town meeting.
So if I understood Dave Nixon correctly, I don't think they wanted to combine them. But I can follow up on that.
Madam Chair, if I could fill in some of the blanks.
Yeah, thank you.
I think it was your meeting 2 weeks ago where the concept came up. Members were talking about that. In the interim, the CPC chair and recording secretary confirmed that the committee does not desire combination.
So that brings me back to the petition articles, are the only ones that I know that we could then forward over to bylaw, unless anyone, I don't think that we're ready with any other petition, with any other article other than the petition articles to send.
So for me, as you discuss the warrant, one of the things that could be helpful, perhaps with tonight's discussion, is, so I'm not presenting these with those article numbers yet, because I know there's been discussion at the board level about where you would prefer to insert things within.
Right.
In other words, I think there's been a solid and good discussion on petitioned articles as an example. Where should they fall? So that kind of guidance would be very helpful for me, and I can start giving you solid drafts of the warrant. Again, for my purposes, and it goes back to prior roles that I've had in municipal government, there are occasions where bond counsel has asked for the various iterations and explanations. So the preference would be is if you're going to accept the warrant, that you give some direction on how you would like it to be laid out, then we can number them and try to stay with that numbering sequence. Additionally, you have in your packet that second list of other potential warrant articles. Is there a desire of the board to pursue those other articles? And that is the page that says potential warrant
Yeah.
articles.
Well, why don't we run through those first, because we've already talked about the WIF. We've already talked about the SEER home rule article. So that leaves us with Harwichport parking initiatives down. And remind me on the Harwichport parking initiative, I know we've had great,
So if I may, Madam Chair, the
Discussions.
background on these articles is discussions that either the board has had over the course of
Right.
the year, or in most cases, department heads were interested in seeing if such articles could go forward. So with regard to Harwichport parking initiative, that goes back to the various discussions that you've had about Harwichport itself. However, it could also tie into the electric vehicle charging station construction concept, because that is the contemplated location of one.
right,
But it would really be, if you want to dive deeper in these, I can reach back out to the potential sponsors of these articles, although sponsor is probably not the right word, because we would look for the board to adopt these as articles that you would insert into the warrant. So Harwichport Parking Initiatives was born out of the community engagement forum that we had on that, and if there was anything to follow up that required an article at town meeting. Some of these are also articles to allow for funding separate from the operating budget. Now, you've heard me say since I presented the budget discussion on February 5th, I don't know that there's a lot of money to go around in the short term, and I don't know that that could happen, but it is a board discussion for follow-up.
Well, if it ties into, the vehicle charging thing, I think we all should follow up, because my understanding on the EV charging stations is it takes some time
Correct.
to get that approved.
Yep.
So maybe that's something, again, we could table for this. I mean, that's up to the board, but if it's going to take a lengthy amount of time to permit that and get it approved, really. I mean, first you got to get it approved through Eversource, so maybe we could go back to see where we are in that process and whether or not it's even necessary this year.
Correct.
Anybody else have any comment on that one? The EV charging or parking? Don, do you have any?
Only to add that Madam Chair and I met with the Energy Committee quite a while ago. They're really advocating this, but I think the timeline you're suggesting is probably correct.
Mhm. So those two, maybe we could table till we had more info.
Madam Chair?
Yes?
The only one in that list, I mean, given the limited amount of conversation that we've had on all of these, and given the length of the warrant already, would be repurpose 2023 annual town meeting Article 31. I think that one we should put in.
Mhm.
That the heavy lifting's gonna fall on somebody else on that one. And the rest of this is something I think we get more information, and personally think we get more information on and bring back in the fall. I do, as we continue this conversation, there's a couple warrant articles I know you and I have talked about that I'd like to introduce. And it's not new to this board, it's not on the list. So
Yeah.
there's a few I'd like to add if we could.
So why don't we talk about those next week? Why don't you email me those so we can talk about those? I think we could talk about them next week,
If you don't mind, I'd like to get them on the table tonight, and I won't talk long.
but they're not on our, can we talk about them if they're not on our list?
Based on the agenda item, I think
I
we're
guess we
covered.
could.
Can't take any action on what you mentioned.
All right, go ahead, talk about them.
One is let's get the first one, sewer protection, the sewer assistance program, SAP. And that's something that we talked about at length with the Board of Health. And I believe the water commissioners have had this as a thought on their line item budget for a while. And the discussion was to put $100,000 into a sewer assistance program, and the Board of Assessors would manage for the Board of Health the financial criteria on that. My suggestion is, and it would be by consent of the board, to go back to the water commissioners, wastewater commissioners, and get their blessing, but because they have that as a line item in their budget, would be to take and use that $100,000 for a sewer assistance program and write said article.
Any comments?
Can't really comment. Just
I know, well, you can
comment.
say, good idea.
Is there a consensus that you
Right,
want to follow up on that?
Exactly, so,
Think it'd be a good idea.
Yes.
so why don't we,
And given that that was a draft, I would argue that because we're having an article discussion tonight, it's reasonably assumed that we could bring up articles. But I'll defer to the chair to make that ruling, but
I'm fine with it. I think
So-
Dawn is not fine with it, but you can go ahead and talk about it.
it's an Attorney General rule, it's reasonably anticipated. The next would be an article for town meeting for this year to do something with the $1.5 million and $1 we got for the lot on Queen Anne Road. And my suggestion to the board would certainly be to put that back into land and not capital items. But we have a $7.7 million tax problem right now. Over $3 million of that is owners unknown and miscellaneous parcels. We have 420,000, which I'm still waiting for an explanation on the 80,000 and where it went, in an account, which isn't gonna touch our problem. So I would like to see the 1.5 million we got from the sale of land put into a fund to continue the research on owners unknown and not land of low value, miscellaneous parcels. So I'd like to have a conversation and a board vote to create that article. And it would be great if we did it next week to give administration time to put it together.
What's your last one?
Last one was real estate and open space. Last week voted to support the sale of 3 lots on Queen Anne Road, commercial lots on Queen Anne Road. I think we were all sent their report. If not, I know the front office has it, but I'd like to get an article, permission from town meeting to sell those lots for the same purpose, or anything else that comes into our discussion next week when we discuss them.
So those are the lots that were deemed open space by previous town meetings?
I believe, my sense is, yeah, the action would be to ask town meeting to allow the select board to sell the parcels rather than keep it as open space.
Right.
Roughly speaking, does that sound accurate?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I've already started that conversation
Okay.
with council. It would be that all 3 come as articles, correct? 3 different articles?
Correct.
Yep.
So those are 3 additional articles. I think we knocked out most of the other ones on our potential.
I'm sorry, I need to jump ahead, but I'm still doing some research on the money from the Queen Anne Road sale, but based on my assumption, I'd confirm it with town council. But sale of land can only be used for something that the town would borrow for 5 or more years.
I would just ask if I could, through the town administrator, Joe, that conversation was a very different conversation than we had with council related to land, sinking funds, and this not being part of that. So I would ask you to get a hold of town council on the 1.5.
Certainly, I can follow up with that information. Yep.
So,
And I would just further by saying, this has come up before, and Don, you probably remember, but this happened before out in North Harwich as well, and that money was reused and not for borrowing, correct?
Madam Chair?
yep.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I had my head handed to me in the early 2000s because we were trying to convert over a physical asset like land and turn it into a disposable asset and buy stuff with it. So this is a good discussion.
Thank you.
Jeff?
Yeah, the only one I would like to discuss, or if running out of runway for the annual town meeting, is the bylaw charter review changes that they presented to us a couple weeks back. And if we're able to bring them back maybe on Monday night next week to get some more dialogue and some clarity, we'll know better at that point in time whether or not it might actually be suited better for the fall versus the annual. But I don't want to drop the ball on this, and I want to make sure that we do what we should.
Yeah, no, I actually wanted to put them on the agenda for
Excellent.
Monday and make sure that they were okay with that date, so I think we should do that.
Do we want that to be a joint meeting? I see Linda here now. Do we want that to be a joint
Yeah, I think,
for good discussion?
yeah, I think it should be a joint meeting. Oh, sorry, Dan.
Sorry, Dan Pelletier, Water Wastewater Superintendent. Just had a concept of an article. I think I might have mentioned it to Joe last week. If I didn't, I apologize, so you'll get it live. So if we wanted to consider putting in like a contingency article for Phase 3, as we discussed a couple weeks ago, the project is currently estimated at 50.9 million. We had previously appropriated 50 million. What I would recommend or suggest as a funding source is we also saw a significant reduction in the dry pipe cost, so we may be able to reallocate or reappropriate some of that money to fund if the Phase 3 project goes over, so we don't have to drop any streets.
Okay, so do you want Joe?
So, if I may, we did discuss, I think it was the week before. However, the concept here is repurposing, if you will.
Yeah.
So I have the information. I appreciate the superintendent bringing it up. I think if there's consensus from the board, That's a very straightforward article.
Okay. All right, so why don't we come back with that one as well? So then, I think that we are agree.
Linda.
Oh, sorry, Linda.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Linda Sabula, Chair of the Bylaw Charter Review Committee. So you would like us to be here Monday night?
Yes.
Joint meeting,
Yes.
so I can post that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
And we will come ready to discuss.
Right. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Anything else you want to talk about on articles? Because we didn't hit on a couple of these other ones, the short-term rental tracking system on the potential warrant articles, the town newsletter, and the bylaw, which would have to wait till the fall, because we would need public hearings, so.
And if I may, Madam Chair, just by way of background, some of those topics, again, came out of ongoing discussions with various folks and the board. Those are topics that did not fit into anyone's operating budget. Again, if they did, they would be enhancement of services, because it's an expansion of programs. So what's contemplated with those is they would be standalone appropriating articles to support those programs. So a short-term rental tracking system would need an appropriation.
Right.
Town newsletter would need appropriation unless there's a willingness to put it into an existing department. And again, enhancement of services.
Yeah.
Just one last question, and I'm probably going to regret asking this, but I'm used to that kind of thing. I believe I saw enhancement, I believe I saw the Human Resource Director as an enhancement of service somewhere.
Administration.
Okay. So do we want that to be an enhancement of service, or should that be a budgeted ask at town meeting?
That is a great policy discussion for the board to take up. It's
So
one of the
I'm
budgets
not
you'll be talking
regretting
about on
this.
Saturday.
I'm not regretting this now.
I think there you go.
Okay.
Answer is depends.
Well, yeah, I think we talk about it more on
Yep.
Sat-
Okay. I just don't want to forget that one.
So I guess the other question is, do we have any feeling on how to divvy up the petition articles? I mean, not that we have to decide that tonight, but you are looking for direction, yeah?
Thank you, Madam Chair. While I absolutely adamantly support the right of anybody to come to town meeting and bring something forward, because that's an age-old right that everybody has, these have been more or less being discussed when the room's got 150 people in it, maybe. And it would be better off if we want to get the sense of the town and its total support when you've got like, what, 11,400 voters, something like that? Oh, wow, I missed the 300 who moved in. So if you're talking about that many people, the idea is to have this discussion with as many people in front of you as possible, which would mean earlier in the meeting, somewhere around, right after the budget, just to make sure that the room is full of interested parties and not just only interested in just this.
So just to make sure I understand you correctly, you're saying put all of them after the budget?
Somewhere around there.
So you don't think we should break them up at all? I'm just asking. Like a few after the budget, a few in the middle?
The concern, Mr. McCaskill's brought this up before, and I actually agree with him. That the concern is, do you really want to wag the tail and have the dog move? I mean, it's ultimately about making sure that the public wants to make these changes, because some of these are pretty profound. I mean, they have property rights involved with them and things that people might want to do, might not want to do. And I don't want to have them find out in a newspaper the next day that maybe 100 and something people told them you can't do that anymore.
I agree 100%. I think putting them back to back to back to back would be an arduous task.
Just something up front.
I'm willing to support putting them up front, but
Not on the second day is what I'm saying.
yeah, no, I agree with you, Don.
Well, I think whatever, maybe we just think about it and then
Sure.
figure out where so we can at least give you some direction as to where we want to put them in. I guess the other thing there is that those articles they need a number for you to move them along, or can you send them along?
No, I can send them along with that number.
Okay, let's send them, and then we'll figure out where we want them.
And I would support putting the majority of them at least before the CPC articles. I agree back to back is gonna be a problem, but that's what we're dealing with right now. So it just happens to be back to back to back to back on a night where half of the people that go to town meetings say, I'm not doing this. And that same half and more complaining after the fact, after more things have been taken away from us. I would imagine the pool one we could probably put first, because asking if you want to, I want a pool. But we should probably have something that says it's gonna cost $2 million. So, and employees, so the idea of support on that, but to Don's point, they have the right to ask for it, but I don't see how responsible we or the law is being in not putting a number there, but I certainly think we should have it at the beginning of the beginning of the warrant.
And Madam Chair, if I may, on the citizen petitions, council has been provided copies and is looking at what the appropriate format is, understanding the petitioner's language. Again, we have very limited ability to change it for them, but we do have an obligation to have language that comports with. So once we have that, we'll be giving those back to the lead petitioners, as well as distributing as appropriate for other committees.
Okay. Thank you. Linda?
Linda Sabula, Harwich Port. If you're going to contemplate a pool, then I would suggest it's not the construction that's the issue. It's the yearly operating cost.
Not contemplating it.
Well, I just wanted to make that comment.
Petition article.
I know, but Carolyn and I, remember years ago?
Carolyn.
We went to, yes, do I have to say community center director? Can I say Carolyn? We went. Okay. The lesser employee over there. She just said I could call her that. A number of years ago, we went through a bunch of calculations, and it was the thing that made people's jaw drops was the annual operating expense. The electricity that had to be running this pool to keep it constantly going, because you can't shut it on and off. You get the frowny face on that. The cost of lifeguards. I mean, I'm sure both of us could probably dig that up if anybody was interested, but it was an enormous addition to operating costs. So it's not just just so the public understands, it's not just the concept of building a pool. It's now every single year you have $2-3 million worth of expenses. That's huge.
Look forward to you on town meetings.
Perfect town meeting.
It's a
for
petition
narrative.
article. It's not ours.
Is that a challenge?
Nope, I agree with you. Don't tell
Let me
anyone.
write this down.
So I think we've exhausted the article discussion. Discussion on pickleball fees.
Want to defer to me on that one?
I do.
All right, I asked this to be brought forward, and it was well over a year that the consensus of the board was to have the rec director address the pickleball fees and the use of 204 Sisson Road. So I will say that this conversation for me is only about 204 Sisson Road. Currently, and I'll only use the high tier rate on pickleball, currently they are charged $75, and 204 Sisson Road gets 20. Only one time during the day that they use it do they have an employee go open 204 Sisson Road and close it. The other times, I believe it's done by a pickleball person. And my suggestion to the board, after a lengthy town meeting and a lengthy building up to town meeting and as many critics as we had, and our promise to the public that we would do what we could to try and to cover some of the costs of that building. And given rec's limited involvement in this, and it is not a rec building, it was not built for the same purpose that the community center was built, and we did make promises, would be to reverse that math, and for the board to take 2/3 of the sign-up fee and give rec the 1/3, to show the public that we are being responsible with that building. I believe it was Selectman Handler that said it was $1.65 a visit for those using the building the maximum amount of times. There's no way at $20 a person that we're even coming close to covering the costs of opening and closing that building. A further agenda item will be what the actual costs are for that building, and then who's going to manage it. Because I do not remember granting authority to give that gym to rec, and us not to look at programs and give the public what we told them we would at town meeting. So my request to the board is to take the larger percentage of that and not change the pickleball rates to the public, because it was advertised, they signed up, they paid. But the math should be divided the exact opposite.
Anybody want to make a motion?
Was that a motion?
Yeah, yes,
Second, change the proportion.
yeah, change the
Change the
proportion.
proportion.
Moved and seconded. Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 That's 4-0, Joe. Town Administrators Report.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. There is a contract to announce. It is for tree trimming services at the town cemeteries. It is for Mackenzie Tree Service. It is about $30,000. The contract talks about up to 12 days of service at $2,500 per 8-hour day. The funding source for this is coming from the Cemetery Revolving Fund. And again, this was a Chapter 30B. Quotes were solicited, and Mackenzie Tree Service came in as the low bidder. That's my report.
Thank you, Joe. Don, Selectmen's Report. Jeff?
Yeah, I only have one. I want to just say congratulations to our varsity boys basketball and varsity girls ice hockey teams qualifying for the state tournament, as well as our cheer team on advancing to the South Regional competition. So congratulations and continued success for this Monomoy High athletic program.
Thank you, Jeff. Michael?
Not a report, just a request, and I did send it to you in an email tonight. I want to get the herring fisheries put back on the agenda as soon as possible to discuss reconsideration for a one-day celebration at the Herring Run in North Harwich.
So I'll follow up with Don on that in terms of his availability.
The other Don.
You're not you. Yeah, Don, you need to see. And then I just want to say congratulations to the Sheriff's Department, their program, they had their graduation ceremony. I did stop to ask the chief to pass along our best wishes. I couldn't stay for the whole thing, so a lot of great atmosphere going there, and I believe it was an excellent program, so. And that's it.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Don?
Yeah.
Michael?
Aye.
Jeff?
Aye.